Welcome back to another episode of the Director's Chair. We are here to finally discuss the much reviled and now loved film,
Revered.
revered,
From reviled to revered.
yep,
Rehabilitated.
prequel, yes, prequel to the Twin Peaks series, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which is in a lot of ways a great segue before we get into the return. Also, this is the kind of the film that birthed this idea of doing David Lynch because Kevin, you had commented on discussing Fire Walk with Me as a horror film to talk about, and I was like, well, if you're gonna watch Fire Walk with Me, you really have to have a lot of context to watch this movie because we'll get
To do it
into it,
justice, yes. To do it justice, yes.
but I want to talk about you guys because you guys are old enough to remember when this came out in 1992, and I think both of you saw this in a movie theater,
Did.
and I
Not
think both
multiple
of you,
times like Kevin, but I did see it in the movie theater once.
did you both like it the first time you watched it?
Yep.
Colin,
Okay.
I'll let you take that first because I've
Okay.
got a venturous story
Yeah,
to go into
for
to
sure.
discuss it.
Okay, so for me, I mean, there's a few things I want to talk about. I mean, I really believe that the way you have to watch Twin Peaks is at release order. Like, I think you
Yeah.
have to watch the first two seasons, then you watch Fire Walk with Me, and then you watch The Return, and maybe you watch the missing pieces right after you watch Fire Walk with Me. I think that's the way it has to be because
Yes.
I don't think it makes sense otherwise. I'd be really curious to talk to someone who has only seen Fire Walk with Me because I think it could really work, but I think it would work very differently than it does for people who have seen the entire thing, let alone just seasons 1 and 2. So I saw it because, of course, I was a Twin Peaks fan as a kid when it was originally aired, and so when it came out, I was super excited that there was going to be a movie. And I think I look at it as the Godfather 2 style sequel, and that it's both prequel and sequel at the same time. And so so I was excited for it. I didn't know what to expect. I think it certainly surprised me like it did everybody else in terms of what it was and what it wasn't and all those other things. But I just went with it and let myself enjoy it for what it was. What I immediately picked up on and what we'll talk about today is, and I think one of the things that I've always appreciated about it is that it really, there's this tension in that Laura Palmer could have been this fridged character. We've talked about this before. She could have been this MacGuffin that is basically there just to spur along everybody else's stories. And David Lynch basically went, screw that. He started saying that in the series itself and centering Laura a lot more and her story a lot more in the series. But here is where Laura's story really comes to the foreground. And we realize, okay, Laura is not just the center of this story. She is the main character, and she's also the hero of the story. And I think that carries through in The Return, and we can talk about that when we get there. But for me, Twin Peaks is really Laura Palmer's story, and her journey becomes central here. And I think that's what I loved about. And maybe that's what people didn't like about it. Maybe people didn't want her to be the hero of this story. They wanted the quirkiness of the town. They wanted the, maybe Cooper to be more central because they wanted him to be the star of the show. And I think for me, it really resonated for me that this was Laura's story. So I saw it in theaters. I saw it with, I saw it opening night because I was a fan. So it was pretty packed that first night because basically every fan in my city was there for opening night. And unfortunately, that was it probably after that. I don't know. I didn't go. I wish I had gone to see it again while it was still in theaters, but I didn't. I came out and had interesting discussions because some people really didn't like it. But it was just really exciting to see all of the new stuff that was being added to the mythology, all of the new stuff that, watching it again, I was reminded about, oh yeah, this is where this comes from, right? Like there's this, none of this was here before. And yet it informs so much of what came later and also goes back and informs a lot of what doesn't. Like, and interestingly enough, it feeds back in that you could finish watching Fire Walk with Me and start the pilot, and it would feel very natural to flow right to there. And I did that one time, and I just found it really interesting watching the pilot after having just watched Fire Walk with Me. It makes a lot of things feel different.
Yeah, it plays a little different. It does. It does.
So
And-
that's my thoughts on that. Sorry.
Okay. So before we get into your backstory of this film, Kevin, and correct me if I'm wrong if we've talked about this before, but from what I understand is, yeah, originally Laura Palmer was supposed to just be like a MacGuffin. It was just, she's what gets you into the show and everything. And Cheryl Lee was a local actor that they hired for where they were filming, but Lynch was just so impressed with her talent and skill. I think that's part of what made him want to do more for Laura Palmer as the show was continuing, was because of her skill as an actor.
And he's conscious. I mean, he said constantly, like, Laura Palmer is a character that he just loves. And it's one of those things like where you in a series that's so full, as Colin has said many times, that's so full of happy accidents. I think casting Cheryl Lee was one of those. Like, he probably hadn't thought as much about, Laura Palmer until he had a living, breathing Laura Palmer there. No pun intended. That's, suddenly it's like, wait a minute. Oh, wow. Like, there's something here, And so we know we were going to get flashbacks in the series. Of course, we see like the videotapes of her hanging out with Donna and James. So like you were going to get flashbacks. So he was going to get to work with her besides just her showing up wrapped in plastic. And I think it's one of those things where, much like with Kyle MacLachlan, there's just a bond, right? Like they just have this thing. And, Lynch, much like Hitchcock, loves his blondes. Nobody would deny that. And Cheryl Lee is one of them. But Cheryl Lee, I've often said, if Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me was given the fair shake it should have had, both she and Ray Wise should have had Oscar nominations for their work in this film. And I don't say that to be silly. I don't say it to be stupid. I genuinely think her work in particular in this film was Oscar worthy. What she puts herself through and what she does. And you can tell that, like so many people said, David Lynch is one of those directors that can just get that out of people. And I think really a lot of it was him getting to meet her, getting to see what she was capable of doing, knowing that she was capable of more. There was just something there. And he just always knew that Laura Palmer was going to have a bigger part to play if he had the ability to do so. And that's where you get this film. I think a lot of it is as much giving Cheryl Lee her due as I think he wanted to do. And as much as just like fleshing out this character that was just kind of living rent free in his brain for so long that he had to do something. And this is what we got.
Well, it's interesting because I wonder if when they were, this is not sort of a typical thing where there's a studio that's saying, hey, we want more of this, so let's get the director to do it. Like, this was something that I think came about more organically from the people who were involved in making it. So it wasn't even a situation where they're like, oh, like, can we get a sequel? And then he's like, shows up and decides he's going to make a prequel. Like, I don't think that was the history here. I think my understanding is that he and some of the other people involved in the show were talking about it as the show was getting canceled and saying, if we could move this to the cinema, what would we do with it? Right. So yeah, it's got a different sort of genesis than maybe a lot of IP kind of things do. And go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is this one of the first instances where like a failed TV show with such a huge fan base kind of gets a continuation like this? Like, this predates Serenity by a decade and other things that would follow later.
Yeah, there's that Breaking Bad. There was a Breaking Bad movie spinoff. There was, there's been a few, right? There's blanking now, but there's been some, but I can't think of too many examples of TV shows that then I guess Star Trek.
That's true. I guess Star Trek
would be, that's sort of its own
Star
thing.
Trek would, I guess, be the first thing.
Yeah,
you're right.
That's valid. You're not wrong there.
Which also kind of has a Lynch-like story of where the motion picture was originally supposed to be like a new TV show, and because of Star Wars, they're like, well, let's just make it a movie.
The failed Paramount Network, man. Well, now it's funny that they got Paramount Plus. It'd be like interesting to see if they could somehow redo that, right? But they didn't have that back then. But I will say, like, this is one of those movies that if there are like fixed points in your life that you remember like everything about it, like this is one of those things for me. So I saw it 4 times at Kanawha Cinemas here in Charleston. Because again, much like I've said before, I knew I'd never get the chance to see it in the theater again. So I had, this is 1992, August of 92 is when the film comes out. So I am going into my junior year of high school. I am starting to break out of just being like your typical, like I watch movies that are big hits in the box office, to becoming like a bit of a movie nerd, you know, getting more into that, right? So David Lynch, one of those directors I was really getting into. So I was finding everything I could find to watch, and everything, of course, I'm watching is on VHS. So I'm watching like, you know, Blue Velvet. Of course, I'd already seen Dune and The Elephant Man, but I'd always heard about Eraserhead. So it was a mad dash to try to track that down in some video store. And a friend of mine, I think, had to rent it from a video store in Beckley, I kid you, which is like an hour south of Charleston. He had to go an hour out of town to find this damn film to be able to
rent. And did you watch it in a basement?
Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, we watched it in a regular old living room, and yeah, that's its own thing. But so he and I were obsessed with David Lynch. Wild at Heart, another one we got to watch on VHS. So I am like, you know, at this point, I'm a big David Lynch nerd. So this is my first chance to see a David Lynch film in the theater. So this is a BFD for, you know, high school age Kevin. Like, this is a big deal. And so my friend Brian and I, my friend Brian is who got me into Twin Peaks and David Lynch. So we go see it, first showing, first day. It's like a 1 o'clock in the afternoon kind of thing, man. School hadn't started yet. So we're there. And there's like, you know, about a dozen people there. They were all fans of the show. And we were just blown away by it. Like, did we understand it? Fuck no. There are things, yes, but overall, no. But, you know, I'm also a high school brain. So, like, you know, there's a lot going on that I'm obsessed with. I had the soundtrack. I wore that cassette tape out everywhere I went, whether I had my Walkman on me or in a car where I was driving and had control of the radio. That was what was playing. Mm-hmm. My best friend Joel, he had it on CD. So we listened to it like all the goddamn time. We made home movies. And we made like a series of weird, bizarre films that would be very much Lynchian in their own vibe. And we made it an ode to Twin Peaks, Fire Walk With Me, where we enacted some of our favorite scenes from the movie. Like, we were obsessed with this film. And I took my girlfriend at the time. She actually thought it was interesting. Like, she was just like, I don't really know what's going on here. And she'd never really watched the show. But she was very fascinated by the acting. Like, she was very impressed with Cheryl Lee and just the vibe of the film. It's a very weird, cool, sexy, scary, you know, intense, crazy film. Like, it's got a little bit of everything, right? And of course, for her, she doesn't have the knowledge of the show, so she's just coming into it very, very fresh, and she was very interested in it. We took her best friend came with us, and she didn't quite know what to think of it, and she didn't love it, but she didn't hate it. And she thought it was at least kind of interesting. Then I went with some other friends. My best friend Joel, we went, and we were just like in heaven. Like, it was just like so amazing to see it. And I can't remember who was with me the fourth time. It may have just been me. I might have been by myself, no joke. But each time, the rest of the crowd gets smaller. Yeah, obviously. To the point where I think the last time I saw it, I think it was literally like a handful of us. Like, that was it. Yeah.
Was this in the same week? Was this like in 1 week?
This was across a week and a half.
Okay.
Because I had until the following Thursday for it to go out of the theater. So I had a week and a half to catch it. So yeah, this is over a week and a half. So I am just obsessed with this film. And I still am to this day. When I came out of it, again, in my high school brain, I knew I had seen something that was very much beyond the pale, man. Like, this is not your typical episode of Twin Peaks. This very much felt like the last episode of Twin Peaks, you know, the end of season 2 expanded because it's so much more sinister. There's a lot of different underlying things that we were already seeing in the show, but it's so much more on presentation here in this film, which again makes it interesting to watch it and then go back and watch the pilot. It really is a different way of watching the pilot. But it's a movie that I was obsessed with every facet of it, with the performances, with the soundtrack, with the film itself. When it came on VHS at my local video store, I was renting it. My best friend Joel, he had a Laserdisc player, so he had a Laserdisc of it, and that was the only way you could watch it in proper widescreen format. So we watched that religiously. There were like some little behind the scenes things on it too, so that was obsessive. My friend Brian and I looked up every article we could find about the film, every review we could read. Like, we were just obsessed. I was as obsessed with this, if not more, than I was with the series. And it's a movie that any chance I would get a chance to watch it or show it to someone, I would. Most of the people looked at me like I had antlers coming out of my head, but for the most part, like, I found who my real people were, and we would all just obsess about it. It is a movie that it is amazing how maligned it was when it came out. And boy, it got like Palm d'Or.
It was booed at Cannes, right? It was booed.
The Cannes Film Festival is where it got booed. Yeah, like Michael Anderson had one of the best. It was like there was silence, and then there was like some clapping, and then it just got weird. It was like, but it's a movie that it's amazing how people have been able to go back and look at it now. And what I love about The Return is The Return was Lynch's way to absolutely make sure that Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is absolutely, without a doubt, fucking relevant to the world of Twin Peaks. Because the biggest critique the film got from the fan base was that it was not what happened to Agent Cooper. We get to the end of season 2, we want to know what happened to Agent Cooper. We don't know what happened to Agent Cooper, and everybody wanted basically this to be a sequel film to the TV show. And it's funny when you look at the missing pieces, had those been integrated into the film, they would have kind of gotten that, because the missing pieces is all the stuff that is like the TV show. Like it
is.
A lot of it
but here's the thing. Would people have sat through a 4-hour Twin Peaks movie?
I'm not saying they would have. I'm just saying it could have been released on television as like a mini series. Yes.
Right.
But in the theater, would I have been there? Yes. Would I have watched it more than once? Yes. Because you know what? I sat through Return of the King Extended Edition twice in the theater. I'd sit through that. God damn it. I'd absolutely.
And I think it was Mary Sweeney, his longtime collaborator, who edited a lot of his work, and also I think his ex-wife, who was I think she was the one that's like, we need to keep this to the narrative of Laura and cut out the
and it's
extra
not
bits.
Wrong. It's not wrong. But it's funny because one of the other things that we obsessed over in the early days of the internet was when we were able to find the original shooting script for the film, which had all the missing pieces in it. And I just remember obsessing over like, oh my God, why didn't we get to see Chris Isaac fight, fucking Sheriff Cable? Like, why didn't we get to see that? Like, that's fucking nuts. Like, why didn't we see this? Why didn't we see that? And it's one of those things like, when you read it, you're like, God, there really is a lot of Twin Peaks here, but it would not have tonally fit into the film that they were making. And I think that was the smart move. I don't disagree with that. It's the smart move. But I'm glad the missing pieces are out there. I'm glad that it's part of the whole.
I love watching the 2x4 scene, but honestly, it adds nothing to the movie. Like the story. But I love it.
It gives you that little hit of Twin Peaks that you need, like the good old quirky shit. Yeah. It gives you your fix, and you feel a lot better because it's there. Yeah. But this is a movie that, again, I didn't comprehend every layer of it growing up, right? So now when I watch it, it is such a fucking tragic film. Yeah. But at the same time, it's also a very beautiful film, and it's a very difficult film to watch. And I understand why people don't like the film, and I even understand why fans of the show might appreciate what the film is doing, but it's not a film they want to go back and revisit because it is a difficult film. Yeah. When you look at the overall, the themes of the movie, it's the things that were already rough to watch on the show, put under a goddamn magnifying glass, man, and put under a magnifying glass for the runtime of the film. It is difficult, but at the same time, there's just some brilliant cinema in this movie. And for the longest time, I would have told you it was my favorite Lynch film until Lost Highway. I think at this stage in the game, it probably it fluctuates between 2 and 3 with Mulholland Drive. Lost Highway will always be my top, but on any given day, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is my second favorite Lynch film or my third favorite, but it's always going to be in my top 3.
What about another question? Sorry. I was going to say another question because you guys talked about, you knew you had to go see this. So this predates, internet movie culture.
Right. Yes.
But were you guys catching up like in movie trade magazines or
you've heard about
reports about?
Con. Like we knew that, like, and I think that's partially like this is one that I think one of those films like maybe like Joker Folie à Deux, which has fallen victim to sort of a consensus that formed before pretty much anyone had seen it.
Yep.
And so basically a lot of people had just written it off. Like I knew some Twin Peaks fans who are like, no, I'm not gonna bother because I hear it's so terrible. It's
Yeah.
like, well, you know, and I think maybe that was one of the first times because I was again pretty early in my film nerd journey as well. That I that was one of the times when I said to when I learned the lesson of no, you can't trust what people are saying. You have to see it for yourself. Maybe you'll agree and be on board with that, or maybe you won't. Maybe it'll be something that's meaningful for you, or vice versa. Sometimes, you know, a film gets like all this praise and then you see it and you're like, no, it didn't work for me, right? So
I've had that happen plenty of times. Yes.
yeah, and so that has, I think this was maybe one of those first lessons because I had read all about Khan. I had heard the stories of the booing. And so I went to see it a little bit nervous that it was going to, I think I generally believed I was going to like it and that I like, because I liked season 2 and season 2 often got a bad review.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I was pretty confident that even if it wasn't popular, I was still going to like it. But I kind of knew that this might be the end of Twin Peaks because of the popularity. So you went in sort of knowing this was going to be our last fix, and it is a good ending for it. Like I'm so thrilled we have the return, and we'll talk all about how much, you know, what I love about it and all the rest of it. But the reality is where this movie ends is perfect. Like if we had never gotten any more Twin Peaks, I think this, and we'll talk about the ending later, but I think that this would have been a beautiful way for it to end.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. There was such, for me, this is going to sound silly when I say it, but I don't think I had this much anticipation for a movie, like the excitement of getting to see it in the theater, since I was like a kid seeing, like, you know, the Star Wars trilogy. Like it was that kind of thing for me. Like I had gotten that into David Lynch and I had gotten that into Twin Peaks, that the ability to be able to see this in a theater, like, and I can use my own money, you know, and I don't have to have my parents with me because they would have never sat through that film. They would have never, because this is also 1992, so they don't really care about your fucking ID. If you're old enough to drive yourself there, you can get in. So it was totally fine. But there was something. There was such a rush, a visceral feeling to this film that few films have had that kind of hit with me. It's one of my favorite theatrical experiences I've ever had, honestly. And even sitting in the theater damn near by myself, I can say that, because there is something about this film. There was something about me, where I was in my life in August of 1992. This film just gobsmacked me. It just hit me in a way that really, it was almost like this was where I felt like that change in myself, that I was not just going to go watch whatever the big hit was that everybody was talking about, the next big, you know, comedy or whatever. This was me actively choosing to watch something that was going against the grain, that was definitely weird, that was definitely not everybody's cup of tea, that most of my family and friends would disown me if they knew I loved this film. Like, it was just like, there was such a, it was almost like I wasn't supposed to see this movie. Me living in St. Albans, West Virginia, I was not supposed to be able to see this film in a theater, and yet I did, and I got to see it damn near a handful of times. And there was just something exciting about that film that I can't. There are a few films that have had that kind of hit with me, honestly. And most of them were Lynch films. Like when I got to see Lost Highway in the theater, I was so stoked because I wasn't for sure it was going to play in my state, you know, because Fire Walk With Me was not a big hit. I wasn't sure Lost Highway was going to play either. And so I was so excited when I got to see it. So few films have had that kind of hit with me, but this film will always have a very special place in my heart. Where I was as a high school student, as a film kid, as a film geek, as a theater kid, as a pop culture nerd, this movie was like, it was a monumental moment in my teenage years. And that's maybe the highest praise I can give it. Teenage me loved every bit of it, didn't know what to think about every bit of it, but loved every bit of it. And I look back on it and I'm trying not to tear up a little bit, but there's something really awesome about, you know, when a film does that to you. Like it's what like we were talking about earlier with Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's why you go to the movies. And this was the moment, like I can put the pin in the timeline, that this is where I became like a real like film fan. And this movie was really what pushed me over the edge, and I never looked back. And I'm so thrilled that my friend Brian got me into the series and got me into David Lynch, and I'm so thrilled that my numerous friends went with me to take this journey with me to see this film that would have such an impact on my life, and even friendships that I made. The play I was just doing, okay? One of the kids in the play, and I say kid because he's 22, he walks in with a t-shirt. It's a black t-shirt, and just in white is Laura Palmer screaming. And I looked at him and I was like, dude, that is an awesome shirt. And he looked at me again like I had antlers coming out of my head and was like, do you know what this is? And I was like, buddy, I was really afraid you were going to tell me you didn't know what you were wearing. But that's Laura Palmer, buddy. That's Cheryl Lee. That's Twin Peaks. And he goes, oh my God, I love Twin Peaks. And we immediately became like BFFs, man. He's got my copy of Lost Highway and Wild at Heart right now, and he's watching them, and I can't wait to talk with him about it. But it's that kind of thing, man. Like there's a certain, like, look at the three of us. We're in that club, you know, like it's when you meet someone who loves that same thing that you love. And becoming a David Lynch fan, you know, in West Virginia, fucking conservative ass West Virginia, being a fan of David Lynch at a time when it just wasn't the cool thing to be. It's, I don't know, there's a special little rebel, and I was not a rebellious kid, but there's a special little rebel in Kevin Polley in 1992 that was going to see that movie in the theater more than once. And I'm not that guy anymore, you know, because I'm not that young anymore, but I miss him. But I'm glad that he existed when he existed, because he's still there. And he's part of the reason I'm sitting here with you fine gentlemen today.
So what about you, Cody? I'm curious to hear, like, because you came to Twin Peaks much later in life.
Yes.
How was your sort of approach to seeing Fire Walk with Me?
And did you watch it in the right order?
I did watch this after watching the show, of course.
All right.
I think I might have watched The Return before I saw this movie, so I think there are going to be things in The Return that will make more sense to me now when I rewatch it.
Boy, Judy sure as shit will.
Yeah.
I'll say no more than that, but that sure as shit will.
But I knew the movie was a prequel, of course, because it was a thing already.
Before episode 1, we had Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, damn it. Before episode
1. That's right. I knew, you know, that people who like David Lynch liked the movie. Of course, I didn't know, like, its full history of everything, of, like, people hating it and then it's now becoming considered a masterpiece now. Yeah. But I believe because I think it was hard to find for a while before Criterion got a hold of it. And I believe I watched it on streaming for the first time late at night.
Which, by the way, it is on HBO Max. If you have the Max,
it is.
You can watch it right now. And I'm glad to see that it's out there. Like, it makes me happy to see it on a massive, major, global streaming service, that it's out there and not hard to find.
But I mean, I can't imagine, and it's funny because Blank Check is doing David Lynch's work right now. And they had Arkasha Stevenson, who directed The First Omen, as the guest for that film, when they did Fire Walk with Me. And she talked about watching it, never knowing even what Twin Peaks was. She had just seen the scene where Mike is, like, driving at high speed, yelling at Ray Wise and Cheryl Lee.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, just being drawn by that image.
Yeah.
And she said she saw it in a bar, and she immediately went to the video store across the street and told the clerk, what is this movie? And the clerk was like, well, that's Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Yeah. Let's check out right now, but you can rent Wild at Heart.
But goddamn it got her on the right path.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because you get to hear about her take on the movie without any of the context. Because I'm watching it thinking, how does anyone watch this without ever seeing the show at all? But it was an extremely difficult watch the first time I watched it. Probably didn't help that I was watching it in the middle of the night. Either like late.
No, that would not. Because there's some nightmare fuel in that film. So no, that would not.
Yeah. But of course it was just taken in by being back there and just seeing, but it's a difficult watch. But, you know, I definitely liked it more this time watching it. And after watching the Mrs. Pieces a couple of weeks ago for the first time. But That's the other thing I wanted to talk about before we just get into the movie about kind of its reputation when it first came out. It's kind of funny how just 2 years prior, when the show comes out, he wins the Palm for Wild at Heart. He's like
Yeah.
at the top
Yeah.
of peak of pop culture that he's ever been as an artist. Like it starts, his trajectory starts as he's kind of this weird eccentric filmmaker, and then he makes a movie that's like a critical success, gets Oscar nominations with The Elephant Man. Then his career almost gets ruined by Dune. Then he comes back with Blue Velvet, which was a critical and commercial success,
Yes.
even though it's weird too. Not as weird as things would get, but you know, if you told somebody the plot of Blue Velvet, they'd be like, "What is that?"
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, it's like, "Oh, he's done. He's up his own butt right now. Like he's gone too far." In fact, I believe that was Quentin
Quentin
Tarantino's
Tarantino. Yeah.
ex-
Yeah.
exact quote about the movie. And of course, he said he loved all of Lynch's work prior to that, and then so it's weird that guys like Tarantino and what's the Infinite Jest guy, who wrote a piece about him for Lost Highway, the writer.
Oh, shit.
What is his name? It's blanking on me right now.
Yeah, but I know what you're talking about because I remember the piece. Yeah. Well, and keep in mind too, like Roger Ebert was not a fan of Blue Velvet. Like, was not, and he was
David Foster Wallace. David Foster Wallace.
Yeah.
Guys that went to bat for, I guess, Lynch, like bailing on him. But yeah, Roger Ebert famously was not a huge fan of David Lynch at all.
Although
Like,
he
I
loved
think
Mulholland Drive. He loved Mulholland
he
Drive.
loved Mulholland Drive and The Straight Story, but I think other than that, the only other two Lynch films he liked was Eraserhead and Elephant Man.
The Elephant Man, yeah. I thought he was pretty high on the Elephant Man. Most people were when that came out. But no, you're right. It's like that mindset right there is why I wanted us to talk about Wild at Heart, Lost Highway, and Mulholland Drive before we came into Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me and The Return. That is exactly why, because that's where the shift happens. And it's interesting because I think Tarantino back then, you got to remember that's
Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah,
it's
and that's
really early in his career. Very early.
So I have to wonder if he would not revisit the film now and be like, well, fuck, I kind of get what he was doing now. Like, I'm old enough now that I can see it. And because let's be honest, he was a young filmmaker. His own head was up his own ass at that time. Let's be honest, it was because he was basically being told by everybody his shit didn't stink. And you know,
because Reservoir Dogs was 1992.
Yeah,
yeah. So he was probably at Cannes with Reservoir Dogs. Yeah.
So it's like I love Tarantino. Don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of his, and talk about a guy I'd like to sit down and have a beer with. I would love to, but I think there was his own ego at that time. He's younger. He's got his own ego, and I think if he were to revisit some of this stuff now, I would be interested to see what he would have to say. I think there would be. Like a lot of people, it would be kind of like, I was kind of wrong on that, wasn't I? Yeah, I may have been. Granted, there's not enough naked feet in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me to really make him change his mind, but I'm just saying he could relook at it differently. But it was so funny because, like, loving something so much, like I love Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. It was so crazy seeing so many people shit on it, and like Colin said, a lot of people were shitting on it who never even saw it. And so it's like, well, you don't really get to have an opinion on something that you didn't go see. That's one thing I will always tell anybody. You can have an opinion as long as you've got facts to back it up. But if you don't go see the film that you're going to trash or love or what the fuck ever, then your opinion means jack shit because you didn't do the work. You relied on someone else's work, and that's bullshit. That's not an opinion. That's just speaking someone else's opinion for yourself. That's not real. That's fucking pathetic. So it was really... my close circle of friends who were Lynch nerds, I mean, we felt like outcasts loving this film like we did. We really did. It was, because so many people would look at us like, you watched that? Like, oh, that movie is shit. It's terrible. But like, I heard it was just like the worst movie ever. It was always, I heard it's bad. I heard it's the worst movie ever. I heard it got booed. It was never that they'd actually done the work and actually seen it. And so that was very frustrating. And again, living in a very conservative town like St. Albans, West Virginia, it was tough. It really was. It was just, you just felt like an outcast. But that was also part of the appeal of loving these films, was we were outcasts and we were like finding these things wherever we could, and it was a beautiful thing. But this is one of those movies, again, like there are just certain films that I remember exactly where I was when I saw it, and I remember who I was with, and I like, you can see it in your mind's eye. And this is one of those for me, man. Like, it, haters be damned. I will.
I mean, to be fair, there was a lot of fans of the show that were also not fans.
Oh no, that's true. Because again, they didn't get the sequel that they were wanting, and that's where that all comes from. You can totally point right there and say, this is why the fans who hated it, because it wasn't giving them what they thought they wanted, which was the sequel to the show. And
shocker! Fans getting upset that they didn't get what they wanted from something.
That's just every day, right?
Yeah, I mean, but back then, you got to remember, back then fandoms were not like they are now. You know, you didn't have your echo chambers online to get into.
It wasn't as intense. I remember the famous example, of course, is that when Michael Keaton was cast in the first Batman movie.
Oh God, yeah.
There was letter writing campaigns of people saying, "This is shit. This will never be any good." And so fandom has always been like this. It's just never been able to amplify in the way that it does now.
Right, because of the internet. But correct me if I'm. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I mean, for me, one of the biggest critiques I heard from fans, from other people who like the show, was that it wasn't Cooper. Like, for them, the show was all about Cooper, and this has so little Cooper in it. And again, for me, I actually really appreciated that. But for a lot of people, I think that just having it not be the many adventures of Agent Cooper was really problematic for people.
Yeah, and I understand, and I get it, because like there's a part of me that wanted to see more of him too, but I was so excited every time he popped up on screen that it was just like, oh, all right, there's Cooper. Like, what's up? Cool.
And I know there was some history of that. For his first comic book, was like, I don't want to do it. And then he was like, okay, I'll do it. But by then they'd already like made shifts. Like, I know there's the whole thing that all of Chet Desmond's role was originally going to be Cooper. And would love to talk some more about that. But Cody, I know you had another question.
Oh, yes.
I cut you off. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I was trying to... correct me if I'm wrong, though, but had this movie done better, I think Lynch was planning a couple of other films that would have gotten into the mythology, so we probably would have gotten that film had this received better.
Yeah.
But if we want to get into the, of course, which is the first 30 minutes of the movie, which I can imagine some people being upset already. They're walking in and they're like, well, what is this?
I love that. Let me talk about this.
I do too.
So first of all, the thing that I love is that, like, there's this meta moment at the very beginning where the opening credits are against a static
television static,
and then there's an axe shattering the TV. Like, Lynch is saying to us, this is not your TV show anymore, right? We are axing that right away.
And this shit's not subtle. Like, that's why people don't get it. It's not subtle.
It's like
it's a literal like blunt object hitting a goddamn TV.
Like, exactly. And then then we get into this mirror world of what the town of Twin Peaks is like. Deer Meadow is everything that Twin Peaks is not.
It's the anti.
It's like the Bizarro. It's the Bizarro Twin Peaks, especially with the sheriff's department being so antagonistic towards them.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Which I did.
And so originally, like I said, I believe the script was that all of that was going to be Cooper. He was still going to be dealing with Sam, though. So there's that great reference in the pilot episode where he says, reach out to Albert because Sam's, whatever. So he would have had that history. But instead there is this, because Cooper then said he didn't, he ended up rewriting it and making it this other agent who, fortunately, he gives Chet some like real personality. Like, he's not Cooper, which is great. No. He's a lot more sarcastic. He's kind of more devious and less like gung-ho, like Boy Scouty, and a lot more kind of like high on himself. Like, I love the character of Chad. I mean, first of all, I crushed when I was a kid. I crushed on
Chris Isaac.
Chris Isaac, thank you. Yeah. Blanking on his name. Saw him in concert one time, got him to sign a thing. He was like sweaty when he was signing my thing. It was like one of the hottest things I've ever seen in my life. But he's got a great character. Like, he's not Cooper. I like that they made him that he wasn't just a duplicate of Cooper.
What I always liked about Chet Desmond is that he feels like he's been in the game for a while.
Yeah.
He's got a world weariness that's very genuine. Like, this is not his first case.
No.
And fuck all, what is he doing on the other side of the country when he should be like in DC? Like, he's been through shit. I mean, hell, we even see him on the case beforehand with all the fucking kids in the bus, which was apparently like, holy shit, that's so funny. Like, it's so ridiculous. It's so nice. But like, I'm with you, Chet Desmond, and I love Sam Stanley. Because again, 1992, Kevin, is like, holy shit. That's fucking David from the Lost Boys, man. Like, holy fuck. David's in this. And I also love Flatliners, so I'm like, fuck, Kiefer Sutherland's in this? Hell yes, this is great.
I don't, speaking of his character, Sam and Agent Sam, Kiefer Sutherland, I don't think he gets enough credit for how versatile of an actor he really is.
He doesn't. He's so great in this movie. Like,
because this is like polar opposite of Lost Boys Stand By Me, Kiefer Sutherland.
He's not cool. He's not like scary. He's just this like nebbishy little quirky little guy. And I love him. Like the ridiculous instrument that he has around his neck, that gigantic camera thing, whatever the fuck it is. Like, I love it. He's just great. I love how he's so naive. He's so new to everything. And I love that he is the perfect partner for a world-weary guy like Chet Desmond. Like the scenes of them together are magical. And I really like, I'm not one of those people that was like, well, why aren't we in fucking Twin Peaks? I was like, just, I don't know where this is going, but I trust David Lynch. I love these characters. Let's just see how this plays out. And I adore them. I love those two characters.
And I know I've made the connection before, but like, I wonder if Chris Carter watched this movie as well, because there's a lot of Mulder, Scully, a little bit with Desmond and Sam.
With those two in particular, yes.
But it is so connected to Twin Peaks, because this is the investigation of Teresa Banks' murder. We had heard about her so many times.
Exactly.
And we knew she was close by. It wasn't in Twin Peaks, but it was close by. Like, we knew, like, seeing all of that play out as a Twin Peaks fan, as a fan of the show, it's like, oh, this is great. I'm getting this.
Right.
Like,
yeah, I was totally in. I'm with you, Colin. Like, man, you and I wish we could have known each other back then, because we'd have been BFFs sitting in the theater on this thing, man. We'd have been like so fucking geeked, because this stuff is so good, and it is the stuff that we knew was leading up to it, and we knew that this was a case that was very important. So it's like, this has relevance to the lore of all things Twin Peaks. And I love the fact that Deer Meadow is like the anti-Twin Peaks. I think it's fucking hilarious. Like, and I love the
something I didn't notice till watching the missing pieces. There's a picture of the sheriff bending still. I was like, oh well, now that scene makes more sense now.
Cable Ben Steel is the actual caption underneath it. I will never forget that as long as I live. The first time I saw it, my friend Brian and I just started fucking dying laughing at that picture. Cable Ben Steel. We were crying laughing already. And all the fucking terrible jokes that they make, but it's like, you know, like, hey, how's that coffee? It's like, oh, it's fresh. About 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And then the little, like, the lady who's like their Lucy is like, it's so ridiculous. But then you've got, God bless the beautiful autistic coding of Sam Stanley. And as the parent of a kid with autism, Sam Stanley is absolutely autism coded. You will never convince me differently. But just watching him just sit in the room and just look around, and he's just like, you can tell he's like thinking about something. And then fucking Desmond sits down and is like, Agent Desmond, I figured out that the actual cost of this entire like office is like $52,000. Like, he's literally
furniture included.
Every fucking thing in there. I love Sam Stanley. We did not get enough of him. We did not get enough.
I was kind of hoping he'd be in the return somewhere. Shut up, because he's not missing.
Me too, Colin. Me
too.
God
like
damn.
He could have filled in.
He could have.
Yeah.
Have you guys heard? Have you guys heard of the dream theory for this section, though? This idea that it was Cooper who did the investigation of Teresa Banks, but that what we're seeing is a dream that he's having, where he imagines that it's Chet Desmond instead of
I have
him.
heard that. Yes.
Okay.
I find it interesting. I don't necessarily subscribe to it, but I find it interesting, especially in terms of the fact that he's just missing, because Cooper wakes up and then we immediately go to Cooper and we see him in the movie. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting. It's one of those things about Twin Peaks where, like we've talked about many times before, how there's lots of different ways of interpreting what you're seeing, and it may not be the way you're seeing it, but it still is interesting to think about, right? So as I was watching this time, I was thinking about that more.
Yeah, and there's no wrong interpretation. I think that's the beautiful thing about it. Yes, you can totally I understand why people would subscribe to that theory. I totally get it. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it was meant to be the case.
No,
I don't, especially when you look at all the missing pieces stuff. Like, I don't think that was meant to be the case. But you know what? You're not wrong, because if you look at the film as it stands, the theatrical release, I can totally understand where you would think that, because exactly like you said, it cuts to Agent Cooper right as that scene goes black.
Yeah.
We cut to the Philadelphia office, and there's Cooper. So yeah,
and he's talking about a dream that he had.
And he's talking about a dream that he just had. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's totally valid. And we know that Cooper is someone who does have vivid, incredible dreams, and they always seem to mean something. So I'm not against it. Do I subscribe to it? No.
Yeah.
But do I get it? Yeah. And do I think it's a neat way to watch it? Fuck yeah, I do. I think that's totally. And again, knowing what we've talked about with Lynch in the previous films we've just talked about, this is a guy who loves dream logic.
Yeah.
So does it make sense? Yeah. Shit, you're not wrong. You're not wrong in whatever interpretation you have of this. You're just not wrong. That's the way
we have no answer to what happened to Chet, right? Chet
and that's so heartbreaking because he's such a great character that to not know, and spoiler alert, even after the return, we still don't know what happened to Chester Desmond. And I hate that because Chris Isaac is so fucking good in the part.
Yeah, he is.
B, makes Chet Desmond someone that I really care about. Like, I really want to know more about Chet Desmond. I would love to have watched the whole TV series of Chet and Sam getting into crazy shit. I'd have watched the fuck out of that show. I'd have been there every goddamn week. You couldn't have stopped me. And the two of them they're so wonderful. And I guess that for me is one of those things. The opening of this film, the opening 30 minutes, I was totally invested right out the gates. Like, I love these characters. I want to see where this shit goes. And I think that's a real testament to how Lynch, wrote and shot this thing, is that it's a unique energy to those scenes that I can't explain it other than just it feels important. It's constantly moving towards something, and we know it's eventually going to catch up to the Laura Palmer murder. So I don't know, to me, like, I just was kind of like along for the ride, man. Like, it was just exciting to me. Now, I will say, in this opening sequence, we get the return of one of our all-time favorite characters, of Gordon Cole.
Yes, I was laughing so much. Just him on the phone yelling.
Dude, him yelling at, like, I need to speak to Agent Chester Desmond in Oregon. So you see where he's like, Chet, like, and he's like, okay, Gordon, Oregon. Like, fuck me, dude. In the theater, I was.
And then he, like, lowers his antenna so the volume will go down.
Fuck me, dude. I'm not lying. I in tears. My friend Brian and I were in fucking tears laughing at that scene because David Lynch is perfect as Gordon Cole. There's nothing more to be said. You can't recast that part. It has to be him. And
I think it's just David Lynch amplified by about 11. It's just him as the person.
Like, you get that first scene, and that's already awesome. Like, that's already fucking great. But then we get the introduction of Lil.
Yes.
His uncle's sister's girl.
This is where we get the Blue Rose case.
Yes, this is where we get the Blue Rose. But, like, I love the scene because in the theater, like, there is so much nervous laughter when she comes out because people are like, what in the actual fuck is this? And then you get the brilliant scene of Agent Chet and Sam talking you through the whole goddamn thing as to what it all means. And I was like, that is fucking brilliant. And it's absolutely, we'll use a line from the original series. It's Cooper's, or from this movie, actually, it's definitely Gordon Cole's MO, his modus operandi, that he would do something that fucking weird to get the points across. He doesn't hand them a dossier like that. It's, I want you to check this out. Here comes this little redhead and just watch. Like, but I love it. It's so, and again, that is so fucking Twin Peaks perfectly quirk that I'm like, how were people not feeling that? Like, I don't know people were not feeling
and another part that I felt really captures the spirit is we talked about Bizarro World Sheriff Station, but there's also Bizarro World Double R Diner.
Double R Diner, Hap's Diner.
I mean, again, not in the same way. It's not like the people there are awful, but it's not
welcoming and cozy like the Double R. It's kind of
just the opening scene is the old man from the Inner Sandman video is talking to them. Well, someone's working on a fucking light switch that looks like it's about to blow up.
That's just David Lynch too. He's obsessed with like machinery and electricity being a little off.
Right? But it's the perfect line of Irene is her name.
Again, this film is, I think, the idea that it introduces the concept of electricity.
Electricity is a very big thing with this. Yes, it is.
But yes, no, for sure. It's like a Bizarre World Double R Diner. You've got the less welcoming, but again, not hostile in the way that
Sheriff
Station was. You get that, weird couple that's like one guy's talking. Are you talking about
that little girl that got
yeah.
murdered?
Yeah, like it's
I
very
don't know
Twin
shit
Peaks.
from Shinola.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
it's got so
It
much
is.
of that.
Goddamn, it is.
the nicest person in town's Harry Dean Stanton, and he's somewhat
Oh,
indifferent about
Yeah.
anyone being there.
but like,
Where's my hot water?
the diner scene is fucking great because you get the whole thing of like, now Irene is her name and it is night. Don't take it any further than that.
Yeah.
What a fucking line, dude. Like, where are we going with that? Like, holy shit. So like, and you get again the autistic coding of Sam Stanley where she's like, I don't take any drugs. Caffeine's a drug, nicotine's a drug.
Yeah.
Who's the towhead? It's so perfect.
Yeah, and the way Chet tricks him into spilling his coffee on himself.
Yes, he's like, "What time is it?" And he just he is so perfectly autistic coded. It's fantastic. Like it's
and
great.
Of course this time when they do the examination, they're ripping off the fingernail, we watch it.
Oh God,
I'd forgotten about how uncomfortable that is.
Well, you know what? Again, it's where Lynch excels as a filmmaker. It's sound design. That scene is not too horrible, but it's the sound of the skin tearing and like, oh God. I mean, like I heard people in the theater, like literally, like I thought people were going to vomit. Like people were groaning at that. Like I've seen gory films not have the response that goddamn fingernail scene had. And that's the hand of God truth, man. Like but it's the sound design. It's the sound design of it. And again, I think the entire sequence here in Deer Meadow is another execution of fantastic sound design. When Chet and Sam are doing the autopsy of Teresa Banks, the sounds that you hear, like when they're moving her neck, the horrible cracking of vertebrae where the body has gone stiff and cold. And then like the weird sound of like breath leaving her when they open her mouth and shit like that. There's some eerie stuff going on in that. And then you get the sound of the electrical light buzzing above them as they're opening up the fucking finger, and like it's a really beautiful execution of sound design, as pretty much every Lynch film is. But there's some really great work in there, and the sound design does a lot of heavy lifting in the series and in this movie. But that scene is an absolute like masterclass in how you do it, because that fingernail scene, if you take out the sound, I promise you, is not nearly as disturbing. Like if you put it on mute, that scene won't bother you nearly as much as it did when you were watching it with sound.
I think the thing I love the most about this section, other than it just being like, oh yeah, we're getting like the first case, and it's like, this is very much murder mystery,
Yeah.
So it's weird that people were like confused by it, but
well,
I just love
echoes the pilot in so many ways.
Yeah.
In so many ways. Yeah, Jesus. Because Teresa Banks is found in the water wrapped in plastic. Like it's all right there.
What I love about Chester Desmond, Chris Isaac's performance is, you guys talked about his jadedness and his weariness, but I love how he never loses his cool, even when he grabs that deputy by who we later is corrupt by the nose. Like, even though when he fights the sheriff and the missing piece, like he never loses his calm.
No,
like he's willing to do whatever he's got. He's going to get his hands dirty, but he's not going to lose his cool.
But you know what? Chester Desmond is someone I want in my fucking corner. I'm going to tell you that right now. Like, I want that motherfucker in my corner because that guy doesn't lose his cool. He's been through some shit, and you can tell in the performance that he gives. This guy's seen some shit. This is not his first case. It's certainly not. And I really appreciate that. His demeanor, again, in dealing with people who get in his way, you know what he does? He just gets them out of his way.
Yeah.
He grabs that fucker by his nose.
He does what he needs to. He doesn't get upset, doesn't get worked up.
You're going to go fix me a fresh pot of coffee right now, and I'm going to go talk to this goddamn
And when the sheriff's like, I don't want you here, he's like, well, I'm here from the federal government.
Yeah.
So what are your guys' theories on Chet, and what happens to him? Any theories? Any thoughts?
If we're looking at the ring, and that's obviously where he grabs that and is gone. Okay, so that to me tells me he's somewhere in the red room area, that area. Now, could you also play up the idea that he could be a tulpa, a potential Cooper tulpa? I don't know. It's not improbable. It's not, because he touches the ring, and that's what sends all tulpas back in, is when they touch the ring. So that, and it would explain he is a lot like Cooper. Not exactly, but there are similarities there. And again, like, could I buy into that theory? Yeah. Do I think he's still kind of his own thing? Yes. I've always thought he was his own person, and I think he's somewhere.
He could be a Chet Desmond Tulpa, like maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck, we don't know. We don't know what Chet Desmond's seen. So he could be a Chet Desmond Tulpa. But I like to think that Chet Desmond is somewhere in the Black Lodge, like lost, perhaps. I would like to think that he's trying to find his way out and just hasn't yet. Cooper has had the chance to do so, but Desmond has not. I like to think he's still in there fighting the good fight, trying to get the hell out of there. But unfortunately, we'll never know what really happened to him. And that is one of the great crimes of the Twin Peaks universe, is that, you know, not everybody gets to have their happy ending. Not everybody gets a chance to have that. And Chester Desmond is one of those casualties, for lack of a better word.
I mean, the thing about that scene that's important to remember is that it's not necessarily that he did, like, we don't see him disappear. We see him grab for the ring, and then it fades to another scene.
Right.
Meaning he could have, he could physically be in the world, but he could have somehow decided to make himself go missing. Like, we don't know. There's just so many, like, so much potential there. Again, it fits with the dream theory. If that's
it also does. Yes, it does.
Yep.
Yes,
I like your Tulpa theory. I think that makes sense too. There's you know, there's a number of different ways it could go. He could get somehow have been folded into something else.
Yeah.
I think it is one of those great mysteries that will never have an answer, and that just allows you to speculate in so many fun and different ways.
That's, again, the great thing about that is whatever you come up with, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Whatever your theory is, you're not wrong. To me, I just really quick, I want to go back to Harry Dean Stanton, because you know, it's so great. The Fat Trout Trailer Park, great fucking name. You know, Harry Dean Stanton is so charming in every scene that he's in, and he has one of the funniest lines I've ever heard uttered by a human being in any film ever, and it's the most inappropriately funny line. But so help me when he's like, you know, we hear about Teresa Banks. He's like, man, I'll tell you what, ever since that girl got murdered, her place has been more popular than Uncle's Day at the whorehouse. Like, fuck me. The first time I heard that line, like, holy shit. I about coughed up a lung. I was laughing so hard. And it's the brilliant delivery of it. Like, the way that Harry Dean Stanton is so matter of fact. Like, he's said this line before. Like, he has said something is like Uncle's Day at the whorehouse before. It's a go-to catchphrase. And I'm fine with that. I'm totally here for it. But I do
also,
love
it apparently makes jet fuel for coffee.
Yes, it's got the sting. It's got the sting of the 48-hour blend. I fucking love it. It's God. And that's one of the scenes that we did for our ode to Twin Peaks. No joke. It's the sting of the 48-hour blend. We certainly need a good pick me up, don't we, Agent Desmond? And then drinking the coffee, and then he has to say it again. We certainly need a good pick me up, don't we? Yes, Dan. Yes, Dan, we do.
When it comes to the missing pieces, I really if I was going to get to add something back in, definitely the fight scene, I think, is one that
yes,
it's seen in great. There. It does go on for a while. I get why it's cut, but it could have been so trimmed. Satisfying. I think a lot of the rest of what we see from Chet, though, is more just extra of the scenes that are already there. I really found that. I do like the idea, though, of Sam and Cooper. Like, I'm sad we don't get to see the scene where Sam and Cooper.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that scene of, like, Cooper talking to him, like, in the lab or whatever they are.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I'm jumping ahead a little bit because that would have happened after we jump to Philadelphia. So do we want to jump to Philadelphia and start talking about that?
Well, really quick, I will say when we go to the Fat Trout Trailer Park, okay, that's when we start hearing the electricity sound that sounds like, which we'll get to that in a second, but there is significance in that. And it's interesting that Carl, at one point, he just kind of looks like he's almost like unplugged. And he has that line where he's like, you know, I've been places. Well, if you've read the history of Twin Peaks that Mark Frost wrote, you find out that Carl, along with the log lady, were abducted by aliens, which honestly, I think we all know in that universe is involving things within the forces of the Black and the White Lodge. And I tend to think that Carl and the log lady got abducted. I won't say abducted. I think they somehow encountered White Lodge inhabitants because they end up being such forces of light when it's all said and done that I don't think they were in the Black Lodge. I don't. I think they may have been privy to the knowledge of the Black Lodge, but I don't think they were in it because they don't they don't strike me as people who have seen that kind of level of evil. They seem like people who have seen a goodness and decided that they need to act on it. Especially, not trying to get too ahead of ourselves, but Carl in The Return is absolutely a critical force of light. So for me, I feel like, it's neat because he says, I've been places. So you start getting hints that other people have seen the other side of this universe. They've seen the Black Lodge, the Red Room, the White Lodge. They've seen these things. It's not just Cooper. It's not just the few people that we've seen in it. It's this region. There is something in this region because Deer Meadow is not that far from Twin Peaks. So there's something there. And I like that we're still getting that establishment of the lore. It's still continuing to establish here. But you know that we get the electricity sound. We get what's on the windshield. Let's rock.
Let's rock. Yep.
So, when I first saw that, like, I was like, oh, fuck, that's the man from the Red Room. Like, oh my God, like we're starting to tie into that now. Like it's starting to be put together. So again, like at this stage in the game, my excitement level in this film is fucking through the roof, man. Like we're getting so much new stuff and we're getting new information, but we're getting to get to the connection to Twin Peaks. And
he mentions the Chalfonts. Having the one trailer. Yeah.
Not just one Chalfont, but two Chalfonts. Like that. Again, we get that right. So we now know that the Chalfonts are there, and that's of course the lady with the cream corn kid. It's David Lynch's kid. So like we're starting to see that connection. So it's like, oh shit, like there are real, genuine connections happening. I don't understand how people didn't get this in the theater. Like I really don't. But whatever reason, we now make our.
I wonder if, which would be weird. But I wonder if some of the people that went to see the movie were people who didn't finish season 2 as well. Like, were people that checked out after they solved Dolores' murder. But interesting about Philadelphia, because we do get that kind of closure sort of with Philip Jeffries, even though we don't get a Chester Desmond closure.
Yes. Especially with the missing pieces part added in. You get a lot there, but no, I think now we go to Philadelphia where we see our dear friend, Special Agent Cooper, talking
about his dream
to none other than Gordon Cole.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're in the office, and of course it's great because Albert's there too, which is great. So we get a little bit of Albert.
She's talking to Albert about his dream.
But I love how Albert has continued his sarcastic. Like he's still not buying any of this. People are throwing.
In the missing pieces scene, like the extended of the Philip Jeffries stuff, I love Miguel Ferrer's just smart ass responses to everything he's saying to Gordon.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly don't want to talk about you.
Yeah.
Well, for me, like it's still one of my favorite lines where it's like, I have this dream about this young woman and she's in high school and she has a problem with drugs. And he's like, well, wow, Cooper, you've only explained like you described like half of the kids in the United States.
Yeah. But I think the thing that struck me when I first saw it, because now I'm used to it, but when I first saw it, like, first of all, it's David Bowie. So that has a certain kind of effect on you just because of that, again, the meta-ness of that. But the fact of how he's dressed too, like we've seen all these agents be dressed a very certain way. And then he's dressed like he's at a beach resort.
But technically, he's been in Argentina.
Yes,
so
I know. But still, it's not like these people are dressing necessarily for where they're going. They're always wearing their uniform. And so the fact that he's not is also disconcerting. And he's acting the way that he's acting, too, which is disconcerting. And the way he's talking. But I think the thing that I always just find really interesting, and this is something I think I picked up more on later, was his pointing at Cooper and saying, do you know who this is? Right?
Yes.
Because, there's this concept that if you get to the lodge, you've always been there and you always will be there. And so there's this like, or also is Philip thinking, like confusing him with the, with the Mr. C that's out in the world later, right? Or is he, so I mean, this is all pre-Laura's death, but like with being in the lodge and going back and forth, like he's been
time has no meaning there.
Yeah, time has no meaning. He's like, maybe he's like pointing out that, is this who you think it is, right? Like it's that part's just...
Also, isn't his disappearance just a few years before the events of Twin Peaks? And so how young of an agent is Cooper where Cole's like, you probably heard about him from the Academy, like it's this famous like
Mm.
FBI agent went missing, and we don't
Yeah.
know what happened to him.
He's probably one of the horror stories that they tell them about. Man, this job has you know, it has
Right.
problems, it has issues, it has danger. This could happen to you. What I've always enjoyed about that scene too, though, is the fact that, you know, it's the electricity is starting to get funky again, right? Because Cooper keeps walking out into
Yeah.
the hallway and looking into that camera, and
Yeah.
keeps going back in, and there's no one there. And then finally he comes back in, and he's still standing out there
Yeah.
as Philip walks past him. And if you look at Philip's motion, he is moving past the person. He's not walking through him. He walks past him. So it's like time and space are getting funky. Electricity is getting funky right here in this spot. And of course, when he's talking the whole time, now we start getting the initial seeds being planted that would have massive payoff in Twin Peaks: The Return, episode 8.
Right.
We hear about a convenience store.
Yeah.
We hear about, you know, that they meet in this place. We hear electricity. We hear the while he's talking. We see the static. We see power lines. We see the Fat Trout Trailer Park power lines. Like, it's all over the place, and he's like all over the place himself because time and space don't really mean anything to him anymore. Like he's trying. It's almost like he knows his time there is very limited. So he's trying to get out as much information as he possibly can, but his brain is so fucking scattered he can't.
Yes.
And it's like he's trying to give them like the Cliff Notes of what he's seen.
And he was never there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have the missing pieces scene where he reappears back in Argentina. You know,
and
where
like
it seems like he
black on the wall and everything. Like, you get the guy. It's just like he tells him that he just shit his pants. Because that just came out of fucking nowhere, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, it's very intense. But then, of course, we find out more about Argentina in The Return. So again, The Return makes this film so fucking important, and I love that. It's so critical. But again, we're getting all this lore building, and we don't even realize we're getting it, you know, because in 1992 we have no idea what's going to come in 2017.
Right.
But it's like, it's fascinating that we're getting all of this stuff, and in such a weird, disjointed, and off-kilter way that it's very, while it's kind of funny in that quirky kind of manner, it's also very offsetting, and that's really interesting. Like you're kind of on edge the whole time because you're trying to figure out, shit, what is he saying? Like, what is he talking about? And everybody's talking over each other, and there's static and there's weirdness, and then suddenly he's just fucking gone, and you're just like, God damn, like what just happened? Like, holy shit. It's so crazy.
And you could say this whole 30 to 35 minute section of the movie is prologue.
Yeah.
Till we get to the main story of Laura.
Right.
Because it's like over 30 minutes, and it cuts to the town sign with the
the song. We finally get the Twin Peaks theme for the first time.
Yeah.
To remind us, okay, now here we are, and here's Twin Peaks.
Yep. Mike's the man. Mike's the man. Yeah. Like, we're all right there. But there's also, like, in the theater, I just remember when that sign came up and hearing that music in a movie theater, like, I had chills, dude. It was just like, oh man, like, here we are. We're finally back in Twin Peaks, and I'm seeing it on the big screen, and I'm hearing it in surround sound in a movie theater. Like, it was almost like a long lost friend giving you a hug kind of feeling. It was so wonderful to see that.
Even though it doesn't take long for it to get dark.
No, not at all.
No,
not at all.
No, we get a little bit of that comfort food of being back in the town and hearing the music and seeing, you know, Laura, and then of course we have a new Donna. But
yeah, do we want to talk about Moira Kelly? And
I think Moira Kelly's fantastic in this movie. I think she is a great Donna, and it might be sacrilege. She might be a better Donna. I really like her work in this film, man. Like, she's really, really great, and having to come in and take over a role that had been so well established by Laura Flynn Boyle, I think she does a great job with the part. I think she looks the part.
I think she pulls off definitely the innocence of Donna really well, and especially in the scenes at the Roadhouse and stuff where Laura freaks out and is like, I have to protect you. You know, even though she makes it out.
I think you're right. I think and that makes sense because this is the more innocent Donna. Laura Flynn Boyle is playing the lost innocent Donna, right?
Yep.
So it makes sense. There's also just something very Twin Peaksian about the idea that Donna just might look different in this
Yeah.
time, part of the timeline.
Mhm.
Like it just, that also just feels very Twin Peaks.
Yeah, I mean,
I was
it's
almost
not inexplicable.
right. There was a time when I thought like we might see some new actress play her in The Return. It turns out that she wasn't there, but
No.
you know, it wouldn't have surprised me if there had been a third actress playing Donna at that point. That would have been
Yeah.
interesting if they had decided to introduce her. But yeah,
But I think for having to come into it like she did, I think Moira Kelly does a great job. She feels right in line with the universe. The scenes with her and her father are great. Like,
Oh, that missing pieces scene is so touching
yeah,
with
it really
Dr.
is.
Hayward and the mother.
I think Moira Kelly is just fine, man. I never had any heartburn about her because I had loved her in a movie that came out in 90 or 91 called The Cutting Edge with her and DB Sweeney. It's a really cute.
Was watching it today, and my wife's like, "Is that the Cutting Edge lady?" And I was like, "Yeah,
it is."
her.
And The Cutting Edge is a super cute movie. I love that film. It's perfectly of its time, but it's a really great little fun movie. I thoroughly enjoy it, and I loved her in it. So when I saw that she was being cast in this, I was like, "Well, fuck, I got no problem with that. If Laura Flynn Boyle doesn't want to come back, so be it. That's fine."
Well, it's one of the few characters that they had to have in the movie. Like they couldn't just like Audrey say, "Well, Sherilyn Fenn doesn't want to come back, so Audrey just won't be in the movie."
Had to be. It had to be Donna. No, it had to be Donna. You're right.
Donna had to be in there. So there was no way you could do the last 7 days of Laura's life without Donna, James, Bobby. There was a number of characters that had to be there.
Had to be. Yes, you're correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're correct.
She was one of them. So unfortunately, they were able to get the rest of the cast back. It just was her that they could not.
But I think, like I said, I think Moira Kelly's work stands on its own. I never have ever thought about comparing her. I just think she does a great job. When I see the film, like that's Donna, and it works. You know, I never had a problem with her. I always liked her. As a matter of fact, like I said, I might even like her better. Like there's something about her, the way that she portrays that innocence that's very genuine. But there's also that side of her, like in the pink room, you know, like where she's like willing to try to test the waters a little bit, you know.
Well, she's trying to keep up with Laura a little bit.
Keep up with Laura
because she thinks that's how she's going to show her love for her and take care of her.
But and I think she does a great job.
No, you shouldn't. Yeah, this isn't who you are, and shouldn't be where you go with me. And I thought that was.
And I think she does great in those parts. So for me, like I have always liked Moira Kelly in the part, and I would have been fine if the return happened and they wanted to bring Donna back, and Laura Flynn Boyle didn't want to do it. If they'd have brought back Moira Kelly, I'd have been.
Sure, that could have been worked. Fine. Or like I said, I actually would have liked the idea almost of a third. Like, let's just have Donna look different every time we see her. Like
every time we're just going to recap.
Which is very Twin Peaks
in that world. Yeah. Every Donna is a tulpa.
Exactly.
That's it. They're just all tulpas.
For me, when
we've never seen the real Donna.
When we get to Twin Peaks, I think one of the things that was fascinating for me was this idea that it really reveals, because again, you don't know. I mean, we've gotten to the point now where we know that Laura's being abused by her dad. We don't, but we see like that that the image of Bob for her was masking who was the one who was abusing her. Like she only finds out in the last few days, which probably is a big part of what leads to her death, is that it is her dad who's the one that is doing it, because she's seeing Bob. She's not. And again, I think for however you want to read it, if you want to read it as Bob as an inhabiting spirit, or you want to see it as Bob as a representation of the evil that Leland's doing, she is, she's projecting this image onto this to protect herself, that because the knowledge of knowing that it's her dad doing it would be too much, but then she can't not see it anymore. So, she gets to the point where she realizes who this is that's been doing this whole time, and how terrifying that is. And I think that was the impact of that didn't hit me the first, like when I saw this way back when I was younger.
Not on that level.
And now when I watch it, I just find that part so powerful and so upsetting.
Well, I think what's so upsetting and disturbing about all this revelation is, when she's talking to, I think it's James, where she's like, he's been doing this to me since I was 12.
Yeah.
Like if you're
with me since I was 12.
If you're experiencing that kind of abuse, of course your mind would probably block that sort of thing from happening. And then she talks about
it's also part and parcel. Look at any case for the most part of a young kid who gets abused like that. They do get involved in drugs and alcohol, because it's the only way they can really turn that shit off, right? So everything about that, it makes perfect. And if you'd read the diary of Laura Palmer, fuck, I mean, like that's one of the most uncomfortable reads you'll ever have as a
Well,
human. Like Jesus H, man, it's
the other thing that's interesting, of course, because we know from the show, Leland is also a victim of abuse as a
Right.
child, which
yes,
when you look back at the psychology of most sexual predators,
Yeah.
they were victims themselves.
Right.
yes,
But what's interesting is, if you want to interpret that Bob's this evil entity that has taken Leland and now he wants to take
Yeah.
Laura. But the thing is she's talking about maybe she's just rejecting that dark side that might try to overtake her, which is interesting because there's not as many, and I don't know the psychology of this because I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but there's not as many registered sexual predators that are women as there are men,
Yeah.
even though women are often the majority of the victims.
Yep. Yep.
But then again, if you get into the suicide rate, more women commit suicide than men do as well. So, and
Yeah, I
also
think this.
sadly,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what makes it so powerful. There's all the uncomfortable scenes with, the Palmers in the family home, right? In the missing pieces, there's that one scene where they're practicing the Norwegian that I
yes,
think is a really
yes,
powerful thing because it shows a sweetness and a connection between them that you don't get without the missing pieces. Because basically, the movie, as it originally was presented, like does so much focus on the negative in the house, right? Whether
yeah.
it's and all
But
of this
there's a
stuff, like,
reason why,
Yeah.
there's a reason why Sarah stays with Leland. There's a
Yeah.
reason why, Laura just hasn't run away.
Mhm.
There's the cute moment where at the dinner table when Leland comes in, fee, fi,
Yeah,
fo,
yeah,
fo.
yeah, yeah.
It's so sweet and so wonderful, and it's so heartbreaking knowing what's going on. That's why for me, like I've always, and maybe it's just my safe space to do so. I've
Mhm.
always thought in my mind that
Mhm.
Bob is an entity. Like Bob
Right,
is
right.
an actual entity. And I think
Mhm.
I've always looked at Twin Peaks as if the lore of everything, of the
Mhm.
Black Lodge and the what, it's all legitimate in that universe. And if that
Yeah.
is the case,
Yeah.
then Bob is an inhabitant and Bob is doing these terrible things. And I've always in my head had it that Bob basically has sort of clouded Leland to what he's doing because he
Mhm.
kind of knows that he can have more control over him if Leland doesn't know what all he's doing. But I've always found it so horrific and heartbreaking
Yeah.
when he
That he
when
doesn't know, and then he
Leland
has to find
dies.
out.
Okay, like
Yeah.
it's like Bob finally let him see
Yeah.
everything that he had done through him,
Right.
and that's so fucking terrifying and so heartbreaking that it makes that scene register so powerfully for me that I have always looked at it that Bob is a real entity. And I know we've
Right.
talked about this numerous times. But that for me, it's maybe a safeguard for me, because, all of us,
Yeah,
I hate to
thinking
say
about
it,
the other
so much-
way is so horrible.
yeah.
to
And
think
all of
about.
us,
yeah,
if we're all honest, all of us,
especially in that.
we've all kind of had our Me Too moment. I'll just put it that way. Okay.
Mhm.
And so for me, having had one, this is sort of how I safely watch all of it. And
Right.
it adds more poignancy to Leland for me if I'm able to watch it that way. And I think it makes Leland, for lack of a better word, it makes him more sympathetic. If he is not in control of himself,
Right.
if something is controlling him to do these horrible things, there's something about that is such a cosmic horror to me that it really adds to the terror of what's going on. It's already uncomfortable, but the idea of not having control of yourself, like if you were suddenly, like if you woke up one day and your family is torn apart, they're in pieces, there's blood all over the place, and you have no memory of it, and if something just suddenly said, oh, by the way, I've inhabited you, and look at what you did, and suddenly you have that ripped away from you and you can see that is such a cosmic horror. Like as a parent, as a partner, that's the kind of shit that would keep me up at night, right? So that's how I've always viewed Leland's story, is that Bob is this horrific entity that has this cosmic control, whatever you want to call it, control over him. And that level of cosmic horror to me is chilling on a level that few things could ever be. The idea of not having control of yourself and then being revealed the horrible things that you did when you didn't have memory, when you didn't have control. That is God, it's fucking nightmare fuel for me. Like, and so I've always, in my mind, that's how that story is played out. Now, I totally understand if your theory is just that Bob is sort of like the mask that Lara creates so that she doesn't have to deal with the horrific reality of what's happening. And that, again, you're not wrong in your interpretation.
Right.
I just like going into the full mythos.
I think they're both interesting ways to view. That's the thing about, we've said this many times, like there's not wrong answers, and
no, there's not.
It's not boring if you look at it one way or compared to the other. Like they're both really interesting.
So I think there's several scenes that back up your interpretation, Kevin, and you could even argue that there's reasoning with the other interpretation. But the two scenes that strike me is after she kind of already has figured out, but when she like screams, "Who are you? Show me!" in that one rape scene.
Yeah.
And the next morning, she's like, "Don't talk to me. Don't come near me." And he's
Leland
like,
doesn't know what the shit. Yeah, he has no idea why she's like that. Yeah.
And then the other scene is, of course, we find out through the movie and in the missing pieces that Leland was seeing Teresa Banks like as a regular, and he makes a comment about, "Oh, let's get together with your friends." When he walks by the window and sees that it's Laura, he's like, no.
Yeah, I'm peacing out. Yeah, he has no desire to be any part of that. Even gives Teresa the fucking money and is like, "It's all good. I'm out later. Here's your full pay. I'm out."
But the scene that justifies the other theory is that where he's chastising her about not washing her hands. Right. And it shows there that Sarah knows what's going on because
Sarah has definitely an idea. But if you also notice too, the finger that he points to in particular is the finger that would have the letter underneath on it. It's all said and done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So again, but is that Leland in that moment, right? Could that
or is it Bob
taking over? Like in my mind, that's always been like a Bob break. Like because Bob, his whole thing is he wants ultimate control over her. That's what he's trying to do, is take over her, because
and he's unsuccessful.
Not trying to get into too much of the return, but she
wasn't trying to kill her.
Yeah, he's not trying to kill her. He's trying to possess her. Yeah. And so for me, that's why I can say that those could be
well, and of course there's the whole Mike stuff. Why would Mike be there if Bob isn't a thing,
exactly.
right?
Bob's not a real thing. Exactly. Why would Mike be there? And he even talks about the Garmin Bozia, the cream corn. You stole the corn from the shelf. Like he's literally saying things that only Bob would get, right? So that only Bob would have been involved with. So that's why for me, I'll always say that there's enough there that I can feel comfortable saying that Bob is a legitimate entity and that he really does these horrific things through whatever vessel he's in charge of. And in this case, it's Leland Palmer. That's just on how I prefer to view it. But if you want to get real with it, yeah, dude, I mean, you can still absolutely say that he knows what he's doing. And this is her way of not having to deal with the reality of what's happening to her. And
but it's not just, so it wouldn't necessarily just be her. Like he might be blocking out a lot of what he does too.
Oh, sure.
He doesn't want.
I'm sure he would.
Right.
And
so I think a lot of that, like when I look at that scene with Teresa Banks, for example, from the I think it's in the missing pieces. It's that he doesn't think he can do what he does with Laura when they're alone in that circumstance. Like maybe even Ronette would know who he is, right? So there's different ways of looking at it. But again, like I'm fully on board with saying like you can look at this either way. I also think there's kind of a hybrid that my view might be more of a hybrid, is that I don't necessarily think that Bob isn't an entity and that it's all just made up. I think that it's more that these entities are on some level interacting with who we are as people and are
and feeding into those sides of us,
of their evil acts that we do, etc. So you could I mean there's again lots of different ways you could experience this. I want to talk a little bit about how we're, Judy, right? In these, like now that we have some idea that, there's maybe not, Bob isn't the only inhabiting spirit, or that, like how do you interpret, because there's another missing pieces scene where we see, her get really confused, right? Mm-hmm. Sarah's getting like, "Oh, you're wearing your sweater." Remember, there's that scene, and it's from the missing pieces. But it's clearly this idea that she's losing track of herself and things, and some of that might be being drugged by Leland during these moments.
We do know that happens.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, like, there's a scene where he brings her milk, right, in the movie.
And he has her
medicine. Could that milk be drug? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But now that we've seen the return, and I think this is an interesting place to talk about it. So I somewhat spoils the return, but I mean, I think that, watching back, and because I was thinking about this during the series too, like, so the return implies that she has and this even more powerful spirit living within her. And how that, are we seeing things manifest in terms of her, or is this interaction that she's turning away? I don't know, like, what are there any thoughts that you guys have
I'll
about
say this,
Sarah?
Here's my thinking on that. Does Sarah know that Leland or Bob or whatever is attacking Laura? Yeah. Does she fully understand how she knows it or why she knows it? Maybe not. Now, if
Maybe
Judy,
she doesn't know the extent to which the abuse is,
but
like,
if
maybe
Judy if Judy is already here, could Judy be basically turning a blind eye to what Bob is doing? Because what is Judy ultimately trying to do? Judy is ultimately trying to end all things Laura Palmer. Laura Palmer is sent to be the thing to stop her. And that thing that is supposed to stop her is living in her home as her daughter. So is there perhaps a thing that you could say that if Leland is infected with Bob and Bob is trying to find ways to control him, if Sarah is infected by Judy, then Laura is pretty much fucked on both ends, no pun intended, because she's got both of her parents are possessed by things that their whole purpose is to end her. One wants to consume her and be her. One wants to literally destroy her. Is it possible that Judy, Sarah, is just kind of letting Bob do his thing, because the more he breaks her down, the more he hurts her,
it'll be easier for her. Yeah.
That to me is where you could go with that. And, ultimately, what does Bob try to do but like drug Judy, because Bob doesn't want to destroy her. Bob wants to consume her, wants to be in her. So if he can keep Judy at bay, because every time, we'll get into the weird shit here. Okay, so every time he commits an act, basically, we're creating Garmin Bozia. That's what they feed on. So if he's keeping her fed by the horrible acts he's doing to Laura, then it's kind of like he can keep her at a distance so that he can do his thing. And if he can consume her, be her, then perhaps even he could overtake her and be like the head honcho of the Black Lodge. Could that be Bob's enemy? We don't know. It could be. So there could be a whole power struggle happening in the Palmer household that in 1992 we sure as shit weren't aware of.
Which, if you want to open that, if you look back at just their interactions within the show of Sarah and Leland, and you could make that argument that's what's going on.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I think when we get to season 7, we can talk about the way that she does. We'll talk about what happens with her and Sarah and Judy, and what the things that happen while Bob is now somewhere else with Mr. C, right? And off in different places, or defeated by the Green Glove before she. So that'll be whereas here they're like all nested together and intertwined, and he is.
So how could there be any positivity in that house if you think about it, right?
Right.
Any real happiness in that house? The only time there's any real happiness is when the three of them are not being consumed by the evil, and they have their moments to just be themselves, and that's where you get those beautiful moments. But then something turns, and Bob overtakes Leland, and maybe Judy's not quite overtaking Sarah because she's just kind of want to see how this plays out, because if he fucks around and gets mean and does things, I get fed. And I can just kind of, hold back.
I want to bring up something that you mentioned, Kevin, but I think the reassessment of this movie happened before, but we talk about Me Too. Do you think the Me Too movement has kind of grown in the appreciation of this film because of its subject matter and what it's talking about?
I would think a lot of people have reevaluated this film in that way. Yes. I think in a post Me Too world, I think this film, it plays a lot differently. And rightfully so. And hopefully so, because this film, much like the series, does not try to shy away from the fact that this shit happens, and it happens in the most likely places that you think are not where it's happening. It's the places that you don't think. The happy household, the prom queen of the high school, it's happening in her home. No one would have seen that shit. Nobody would think that. And yet in little towns all over the world, including my little town of St. Albans, man, that shit happens.
Yeah.
And it happens every day. And there's something about this film definitely puts a spotlight on that. And what I think is ultimately powerful about this film is that the abuser ends up being the winner. The abuser ends up being able to, in the end, pull off a win. It is a sacrifice.
I interpret the ending differently.
I'm just saying, if we're looking at it from the standpoint of lore of Bob trying to inhabit Laura, in the end, she ends up winning that battle because he does not.
Oh yeah, sorry. That is how I interpret that. She wins by dying.
Yeah,
which is
that's how I see it. Now, it's a sad ending, but it's one where when you know what you know about the situation with the ring and everything like that, and we'll get to that point. But I'm just saying she makes a conscious decision.
Yes.
And that is as brave a decision as any human being could make in that horrific moment. So the bravery of Laura Palmer, in the end, I agree with goodness of Laura Palmer is what wins out. And that to me is where I would agree with you, Colin. If we never got anything beyond this film ends with she's smiling, she's laughing. Yeah, and the tinge of hope that she did overcome the horrific evil that was facing her. That's right, exactly. She triumphs in the end, and that's what I think maybe what Lynch is doing here, and that's what I was sort of saying from the very beginning. And my argument, we'll get to it much later, is that Cooper fucks that up in the return for her, which is like his inversion of the hero arc. Right? Yes, it's the mansplaining problem, right? Like exactly. Yeah. But here, I think she does. She saves herself. She ends up being her own angel. When the angels are all gone, she ends up being her own. She finds that strength. Right. She finds that within. And even the angel appears at the end, like it's there, but I think it's really her finding it in herself. And there's something so incredibly beautiful about that.
Which is the ultimate urgency in taking back any power or anything that abusers take from
she takes back her agency, man. Like she fucking and it's one of the things that we've talked about. This is a theme in so many Lynch films of women being more powerful than men, because when they reclaim their agency, you can't stop them then. You can't control them anymore because they have reclaimed it. And
they have no power over you. Not to quote the Labyrinth, but you have no power over me.
And that's so fucking forward thinking. And I think there are so many women who I think if they would watch more David Lynch films, they would be like, this guy is like the fucking feminist that we need, man. Like this is the champion that this guy gets it. Like he knows what we go through, this bullshit that we have to deal with just being women. This is a guy who sees like the bigger picture here, man. And this is not me trying to mansplain feminism. I'm just saying this is the vibe that you get when you watch these films. If I can say that as just a, basic ass, white guy, in Charleston, West Virginia, if I can pick up on that, then anybody can pick up on that. And I think that's something that as I've gotten older, it is an appreciation that
she also saves Donna, right?
Yeah, exactly.
She saves Donna.
Yeah.
Which, Colin, I didn't know Canada had such a dark side when they go to that. So, welcome to Canada.
Yeah, I know. I think
like,
and again, there's laughs. When I saw it here, there was laughs, of course, in the theater at that point. But part of it is because it's about transgressions, right? It's about like it's crossing the border, right? It's crossing the line. Right, like it's moving it from the roadhouse to this other place where there's remember, this is child prostitution, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think they high school say kids. She's 18 at this point, but still, she's been doing it for a while. So like it really is beyond. And so it's about crossing the line. That's how I see that sort of symbolism. But yeah, she saves Donna, and I mean, I guess she's not the one that saves Ronette in the end. Mike, you could say Mike pulls Ronette to her safety. But
she takes the blunt of takes the brunt of everything, so she kind of does there too.
Again,
she does kind of save her.
Like Laura, the hero of this story, not just the center of the story, but the actual hero of the story. And I just find all of that so refreshing. She saves Donna. She pushes Bobby away and saves him in a way. She
saves James.
She by making them all go away from her so that she can take the brunt and sacrifice herself for all of their be had, like to save all of them, but especially Donna, I think, because they have that special connection. She has connections, of course, to Bobby and to James, but not in the same way, like not in the intensity. And again, that's another thing. It's sort of a Frozen moment there, and that the real love, the most important love relationship that we see here is between these two friends, not necessarily the romantic relationship, right?
Right.
You're exactly right. I guess, for me, like, this is there's so many layers to this film, right? Like, you can get real deep in it. So and trying to keep it just kind of overviews as we keep on going. So we get back into Twin Peaks. We've got Laura. This is now the basically, you've got the stopwatch has been clicked. We're 7 days out from when she's going to die. We know this is coming. It is inevitable. We know this is what's going to happen. And I like that, we see her in high school, but unlike the TV show, now we get to really see what her high school days were like, where she's doing bumps of cocaine in the bathroom. She's having sex with James outside of the gym. Like, like, she's getting shit done, man.
Yeah. She's
getting shit done. And like, she's out there, we learn more about, of course, we also see the other side of her who does Meals on Wheels and who, we know that she, tutors, Johnny and, she's such a, there's the wholesome side of her, and then there's the side of her that is the bomb waiting to explode, basically, from all the fucking pressure and tension that she has from the men in the world. Let's just go ahead and put that out there, man. I mean, all of her problems are men problems. They're not women problems. They're all men problems. All the women in her life are pretty damn positive. The men, not so much. And Lynch is not subtle about that. Like, I don't see how people don't get that. Like, I really don't.
Correction. Sorry, it wasn't James she told it to. It's the guy who can't leave his house when she's talking about.
Yeah, it's Harold.
Oh,
so
Harold,
she goes to see Harold.
Yeah,
she has that where her face starts to become.
Oh God, yeah.
Which is one of those moments that
Harold.
Yeah. But and Harold is obviously terrified by this, but I mean, it reflects what he was telling Donna later.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Right? Like, you see the connection there.
I'll say this movie is responsible for one of the single greatest jump scares I've ever seen in a film. And that's when we see Laura go home. And this is where we start getting the even more of the indications of electricity and the ceiling fan. Where she goes up into her room and the master class of pacing, much like the guy behind Winkies. It is the same sort of thing here when she opens up that door, and we keep waiting to see what is on the other side, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And then finally there is fucking Bob behind that goddamn dresser. I'm not lying, dude. I about jumped out of my fucking skin the first time I saw that film. Like,
for sure,
that scared the ever living shit out of me. Like, more than anything with Bob in the series. God damn,
it is
dude,
one of the scariest moments. Yeah.
Oh my Christ! Like, that is up there with Ben Gardner's head in Jaws. That is up there with the scene in Exorcist 3. Like, it is up there with the top tier jump scares of all time. And it's all about. It's crazy how it's a slow burn to get to it. Like, it's much like the scene in Exorcist 3. Like, it's the slow burn, and it's the sound design.
That gives it even more weight because of what it actually is in the end. That makes it even worse, right?
Yes.
Like, and so but you're right. Like, it is one of those moments that just terrified me, and when I think about it gives me the chills, all of that, and
it's still to this day gets under my, like, I know it's coming, and it's still, like, it gets to me, man. It gets to me. It's that slow burn buildup, but again, it's that the sound design, the woof 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 of the fan. Every time the fan comes on, that thing sounds like a goddamn helicopter. Like, it's louder than any ceiling fan should ever be, right? Like, it's just, and there's just an unsettling nature to it. I just feel like, for me, like that we're starting to see the chinks in the armor, basically, of the Palmer household, right? Like, we're starting to see that things are not right there, and things haven't been right there for some time. So that is one of those scenes that always, and then of course, Laura runs out of her house, and she's laying underneath that bush, and she sees Leland come out, and she just starts breaking down, like, no, it can't be you. Don't tell me it can't be you. Again, one of those scenes that should have gotten her, like, some sort of award recognition. Goddamn, like, she puts herself through the ringer in this film. But I thought that segment right there is one of the most terrifying things. And again, when you know what Bob really is, that scene is so fucking scary. Like, and again, it's that idea that this is daytime. This is after school in suburban America, right? Like, how do you make that scary? And he absolutely does. He absolutely does. Much
Well,
like
I mean, Lynch.
it's how do you make
Lynch.
daytime that scary? But boy, they sure do.
This is something Lynch has done his whole career, and he's definitely a master class at this. Of course, with Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway, it's more of, show business, but he's always been fascinated by the dark underbelly. Like we're talking about, this happens in every town and
Yeah.
in America. It's going on all the time. There's something unsavory going on
But
in places we don't think.
the fact you can take broad daylight, probably 3:30 in the afternoon, in a suburban neighborhood and make that scene so fucking terrifying. Like, and also heartbreaking, like, goddamn, like that's intense, man. That's some masterful work. And again, that's where and this is why I wanted to talk about the film as a horror film, because it very much is. Like, if you want to look at it for the way I look at it, from not only just the suburban nightmare shit, but the cosmic horror of these entities and them being able to manipulate our day-to-day existence on this kind of a level, like that shit's scary as hell to me, man.
When
like,
we get into the night of her death, we get into the events that, of course, we've heard discussed many times, right? From Albert,
but having to see them,
having to see it, have them dragging Ronette and Laura through the woods, like that part terrifies me.
It's terrifying.
The train car stuff is horrible.
Goddamn, yeah. That shit's
very powerful at the end, as again she sees when Ronette sees the angel. That's like this beautiful moment, but to also set tragic, terrifying, sad, all of this. I mean, fortunately, we know Ronette's going to be okay. Well, we don't know she's going to be okay. Maybe she's gone like as an adult. She's
right. We don't quite know.
But, she lives. But all of that stuff, the way he depicts it all, becomes so. Once we get into that bit, like my heart just is racing, like every time I watch it, right? Once we get into that sequence, because we know it's coming, we know it's terrible, we know, and as much as I read that ending as Laura triumphing, it's still because she sacrifices herself.
Yeah, it's so horrific.
Even though I know a part of me thinks she has escaped to, now that we've seen the return, like she's escaped to this other, but again, talk more about that later. I still like, it is wonderful. It's her triumph, but it's terrible because she has to give up herself to do it.
Yeah, there's a cost. And that's the thing, like, much like we talked about with the series, you feel the loss of Laura Palmer in the series. You feel it even more if you've watched this film and go back and watch the series. Like, man, it is
like I was saying, if you start the pilot right after this movie wraps up, everything plays differently, and it feels
does.
You're right there with Andy.
Crying in the classroom, so much more powerful.
Yeah. There's a lot there.
But
so let's talk about the picture that she's given by one Mrs. Chalfont, right? Like, this is one of those neat things where, again, the dream logic starts coming into play, and this is where we start getting into where we're now starting to pick up that the Black Lodge doesn't have, like, time and space don't mean anything. Because suddenly we get this vision of the picture that she's given, right? She sees the picture up on her wall. And then she wakes up and opens up her door in this dream, and there's that room. And there's Mrs. Chalfont moving her along, moving her through it. When she wakes up, who is in bed with her?
This is why it's
Annie.
Sequel and sequel. Write it in your diary. And of course, if you read the diary, you do see that scene is there. So that's
absolutely there. It's absolutely there.
The dates.
But notice that it's Annie after she's been in the lodge. She's bloodied. She's in the same dress. That's actually Heather Graham. They got her to come back and do that. And that again is where you start again with the lore of it, where you're like, fuck, man. Like, now we're starting to realize that these things time and space doesn't mean shit in the lodge. It does not.
No.
Absolutely has no meaning whatsoever. And that's so, again, that cosmic horror that I've talked about before. Like, this is where you start to really feel it in this film. Like, it's really there.
We first see the above the convenience store back in the earlier part of the film, like after with Chet.
Well, we see it in the flashback that Jeffries is talking about. Right. You see the whole thing about this is a Formica table.
That scene gives me chills too. I just had it now. I just had a chill right up my spine. Like, just thinking about the people sitting around that room, the way they're just sitting there, and the conversation that Bob just sort of like moaning as the little man is like talking about the table, and you see that the jumping man I find very.
You got Jurgen Goff just there hanging out.
One of the woodsmen, man.
Yeah, the woodsman. I know now. We know. I know further.
Yeah.
But again, it's like
But
we find out that convenience store, like, it's a real thing. Like, you see it in episode 8 of The Return, like, that shit's there. And so it's such a, it is, you're right, that convenience store sequence is,
go Cody.
I was gonna say, talking about that lodge scenes in the film and like just the strangeness of it, right? My wife was watching parts of this and she's like, because it's out of context for her,
right?
And she's like, these have to be some of the greatest actors on the planet, because how are they keeping a straight face with this sort of behavior?
Well,
because like,
interesting. One of the neat things about this is where we see Cooper make one of his few mistakes. And it's that he tells Laura not to take the ring. He doesn't understand the message of the ring. Cooper doesn't understand it. And he tells her, don't take the ring. Now, you could also say it's not a mistake, because when she puts on the ring, that's when she dies. Yeah. And Cooper's trying to save. So
you're right.
And his idea of saving her, like I said, is messed up.
Letting her live. Yeah.
So it's an interesting point, because again, when we get to The Return, that scene plays different. It just does. It plays very, very different once you get to The Return.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing with the cosmic horror is just the existential dread that's going to happen to both Laura and Leland as characters. Like, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. Yeah, that's another thing that makes it cosmic as well. It's just there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Well, and the horrific moment at the end when she puts on the ring and Leland, and I genuinely believe it's Leland screaming and not Bob, when he says, "No, don't make me do this. Don't make me do this." Again, it's like Bob has let Leland have a peek at the reality of this situation, and it's. That again is so terrifying that he's about to commit the murder.
That's one of those moments where I think that leads me into thinking that this is Leland, doing this, and Bob being that reflection of that, and so he doesn't want, like, well, there's so many reasons why he doesn't want to kill her, but he's gotten to the point where he has to, because he felt like he got to the point he had to kill Teresa, and now he's at the point where he has to kill his own daughter.
Right. Which that cuts back to the smashing of the TV with the murder of the Teresa, right?
Exactly. That's right. So, I mean, either way you think about that, it's horrifying.
Oh, God, yeah.
No way.
But I think it's interesting when we're in the camera POV of the plastic being wrapped, and you see it go from Leland's face to Bob's face,
back and forth,
back and forth. That's
so beautifully filmed. I mean, I say beautifully, but it's like horrible. But it's
chilling. Yeah,
it is such a beautiful, like, it is so beautifully filmed.
It is. It's beautifully shot. It's effortlessly done. It really is. But there's so much. Of course, like, we get to see, of course, the picture, but then another picture of importance is the picture of the angel talking to the little children on her wall, and that angel just disappearing, and that terrifying realization of, like, you're all alone in this, kid. Like,
but she gets to become, like, she realized she has to become her own guardian angel.
She has to become her own guardian angel, and that's so powerful, but it's so heartbreaking. The music and everything in that moment when she's looking at that picture,
and that's a bit of, like, maybe. It's growing up. It's coming of age. It's like before there was, as a child, you had a guardian angel, but now, especially in a situation where your parents are abusing you in different ways, you are having to become. Growing up means becoming your own.
You're your own. You're your only safeguard is yourself. Because nobody else in the town's fucking helping. They're all taking advantage of her. So it is. It's right. It's a powerful moment in a film that's filled with many of them. I think we need to talk about. Well, I like the fact that James has more to do in this than he did in a lot of season 2. James is definitely an integral part in this. We see that of the two men in her life, Bobby is the one who's, like, using her and corrupting her, and James is the one who's genuinely trying to save her.
Kind of leaning on her. Like, you really see in this film. Before you get to James, let me just interject a little bit on Bobby. I think the movie shows that Bobby's more of a little boy.
Yes.
Perceiving him before. And that she's been kind of mothering him in a way, right? Like,
they're using each other. Yeah. I mean,
he's using her, but And
he's really more of a kid than you maybe saw him be in the series. Like, I mean,
Yes.
there's a little bit
right.
of that comes out in the series too, I think too. But I really felt watching this, I'm like, oh, Bobby's really just a little kid who's like messing up and being selfish and
Yep.
being spoiled. And yeah, it's interesting. But anyways, but then James, though, on the other hand, really wants to like, but again, I think this shows that sort of male hubris, right? Like he wants to protect her, he wants to save her, but he can't. And that's not, he's like,
No.
he
doesn't have the skill set for it. I mean, and it's no disrespect on James. He doesn't know.
Wants to.
He doesn't know the full. He doesn't know the full.
He doesn't know the full. Yeah, he doesn't know all the things going on, and he's also a boy.
Yeah.
You know,
James is also a teen. You can't forget that part. You know, I mean, they're older actors playing it, but they're teens, and James has to. You know, he doesn't have enough knowledge of what's going on with her to be able to save her. He knows she's troubled. He knows there's shit really wrong at home.
I don't know if he knows that she's turning tricks. I don't know if he knows the depth.
I don't think he does. I think he knows about Bobby, but I think that's about as far as it goes, really. I don't think he understands
maybe some of the drugs. Yeah, he knows about some of
the drugs. Yeah, he knows about the drugs, but I don't think he knows about the turning tricks, the one-eyed jacks. Like, no, I don't think James is aware of any of that shit. And I don't, and she even basically is trying to push him away so that he doesn't have to learn about those things.
Right. He doesn't know. It's just,
you know, and then, again, Laura is trying to save James's innocence as well.
Yeah.
And there's even that scene where after she gets Donna out of there and they're in Donna's home and they're talking about, you know, how'd I get here? The boys. And even though Laura is saying things that sound derogatory towards James, it's like she's like, no, it should be Donna and James. She's like, James is sweet. James is sweet.
Yeah. That again, it's planting that seed right there. It's really nice. You know, it's there's so many. God, there's so much in this movie to talk about. I will say, like, one of the things.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say. Please go ahead, Colin. My apologies.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, we could talk about some of the other members of the town too. I mean, some of them get scenes only in the missing pieces, others get like we see Norma and Shelley because they're integral to part of the story because they're in the diner when things are going
with
on.
the Meals on Wheels.
But the scene with Shelley and Leo is kind of strangely put in there because it's really doesn't necessarily have that much to do with Laura's story. I mean, it continues to show like how abusive their relationship was.
Well, that's extended in the missing pieces, but I think it's there just to emphasize. Well, also because there's the whole drug stuff. Because Bobby calls on the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it does emphasize just how horrible Leo is as a person and how abusive he is.
It shows that he really was a threat, right? Like sometimes it's easy when you get through season 2 to see Leo more as a joke than as a threat, but it shows that he definitely was a horrible person and had a lot. It was threatening to them and is connected to the Bobby and Laura and drug stuff, but. Again, like Shelley's really only there because, and same with Norma, like it's really only there. Like there were in the extended pieces, you get a little bit of Ed and Norma, which was kind of, you know, we always love to see Ed and Norma, right? So you get a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But it's all cut out. No, you really only see Norma in terms of her being at the diner.
Just at the diner. Yeah.
Yes.
You know, setting up the stuff for the Meals on Wheels. I'm with you. There are moments in the missing pieces though, that if you were wanting the Twin Peaks flavor, it's there. I think we would be doing a disservice if we don't talk about the 2x4 scene because I think it's one of the funniest things David Lynch has ever shot. I think it's one of the best Twin Peaks things ever put on film, and I think it's maybe the most wholly perfect moment in the entire missing pieces.
Well, I mean, that old guy, great. That's the guy from the bank, right?
Yeah, it's the bank guy. I know that's part.
Oh, love it.
And of course, Jack Nance, who was a dear friend to David Lynch, and I think was in most of his work up until his death. Of course, he's right on the wavelength of Lynch and that Lynchian.
Yeah, it's too bad
demeanor and dialogue.
It doesn't do anything for the narrative, but
no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
It gives Jack Nance that scene. And it is just such a delightful scene. And I love again, because it shows that sort of idiot savant part of Pete, where he's like, okay, you know how this works in the bank with money, right? Like
Right.
the fact that he's able to make that connection, I just think
Well,
shows
you
again
get
that brilliance that's behind all of
it is, yeah. And you this is a guy who can play chess with 4 people and beat them all, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But like for me, I just love that we get more of Pete and Josie and their bromance. Basically, it's so sweet and so perfect, and just the way that Josie laughs at the old man and stuff. It's such a charming little scene. But it's so funny because you get the banker man coming up talking about how his 2x4s aren't the right size, and the whole explanation of like Pete literally having to step by step, like, this is how it works.
But is that real? I was thinking about this. Like, I know nothing about construction.
I think it is. I think
so
it
is
is
a real thing. 2x4s aren't really 2x4.
I think it is.
I don't know.
I think it really is. But it's so funny because like when he even admits it, everything, and then the guy just looks at him. So you admit that it's you admit it. Like it's the perfect delivery, and it is the most like Twin Peaks thing since Twin Peaks came to Twin Peaks. Like it's such a perfect moment that I understand it does not serve anything to the narrative, but some of my favorite things in movies are scenes that are allowed to happen like that don't. Like it just works for me. There's just something it was what you were wanting the film for a lot of people, what you were wanting the film to be was moments like that. And you do get those moments. They were really filmed. You just don't get to see them all until you see the missing pieces.
Of Major Briggs reading from the Bible. Like that was one when I'm watching that again going, I completely forgot about that. Like the 2x4 one lives in my head. And
it lives rent free.
But I forgot, like, what is he doing reading from the Bible? Like this part, again, it feels very Twin Peaks and just sort of random. That I like that we get to see some Lucy, Andy, and I'd forgotten that we actually get to see Truman in the missing pieces because he's definitely a presence that feels missing from this movie.
Oh goodness, yes. Harry is such a critical part to Dale's work, and he's such a critical part of the town, and of course with Josie and everything else. That you're right. He definitely is a presence that's his missingness is felt,
and Lucy and Andy along with him, I would say. Like,
well, the whole Twin Peaks Sheriff's Department.
You get the whole department there.
Hawk isn't in any of it, is he? Is he not even in the missing pieces? I don't think he is, unfortunately. I think he's totally gone. Unfortunately, we don't even see him in the missing pieces. But I mean, we do get to see Andy and Lucy, and even though it's very brief and it's very fleeting,
but they're there.
It's only in the missing pieces, but
but they're there. And
I would love an edit where they just edit it all back together.
There are edits out there. You can find them. There are people who have done the
edit. Really? So there's like
extended editions.
There's a 3-hour and 45-minute cut of the movie.
There is, and it's literally because, like I told you, back in the day when the internet was still in its infancy, when people discovered that script, they were like, holy shit, there is this longer edition that has all this stuff that you never saw. And we didn't think we'd ever see the footage. But then, of course, then we get the missing pieces. So people were able to take the script and just cut and paste, and made the film that Lynch had originally written. Now available to watch.
I should try to watch that sometime.
I will say this, it's awesome to see it. But you will, again, like we talked about, it's so many different tonal shifts that it doesn't quite work, but it does, because if you just love Twin Peaks, it'll work for you. I don't think you're going to watch it, and much like with me with the Spice Diver edit of Dune. Okay, like that is my preferred version to watch that film now. It's the Spice Diver edit. Okay,
sure.
But I would never say that the full cut version is my preferred way to watch Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I like the film as it is, and I like the missing pieces, and I like them just fine. It's peanut butter and chocolate. You put them together, it's a great thing. Don't get me wrong. But in this case, I want my peanut butter and I want my chocolate. Like I want them separate, and it feels more. Feels better that way.
I'm reading here that the missing pieces finally became available in 2014. They hadn't announced the return yet in 2014. Right? It was like.
Don't think so.
15 or 6.
It came in the complete mystery set. I think that's what I have. That's the Blu-ray set that I have, is the complete mystery set. I have a DVD set from before, but the Blu-ray set I have is the complete mystery, and that's, I think, the first time that they.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the Criterion edition have it as well?
The Criterion does have it as well. That's where I watched it, and of course, the Criterion came out right after The Return
Right. That is correct. That
came
is correct.
out, which I'm reading that they showed Fire Walk with Me on Showtime just a few months before The Return
They
came
probably
out.
did.
I figure Lynch probably said you need to do that because people aren't going to know what the hell this is if you don't. Like it's
Well,
kind of important.
I want to talk about the last little bit of the missing pieces where we see Annie being wheeled into the hospital. We see the nurse steal her
Mhm.
little ring. She's wearing the ring, which is
Yep.
interesting. That's that I think is interesting. And then we see
Which is the continuation of what people were probably wanting, like even though
and
it's
we
not in
get
the movie.
Cooper in the bathroom, which I think
Right.
is remarkable. That I mean, yes, it's still not what people wanted. People wanted to see, okay, and then what happens after he leaves, and we don't get that, but they wanted to see
Nope.
some of that, and we did get that piece, and it's interesting. But again, I like my preferred like this is about Laura. This is Laura's story. It ends with
Mhm.
her saving herself, her smiling, her being comforted by Cooper's there with her,
Yeah.
the good
Cooper. Yep.
Cooper. And that is the place this should end. So there shouldn't be these other
So I think that was wise of Mary Sweeney
Mhm.
to do that because that it gives Laura's story more agency and more power, and we finally get like her version. She gets her moment
Yeah,
because for the show it's really she's just a MacGuffin, really.
yeah, that's right.
No, she definitely gets her moment to shine, and I think that's what makes the film so special. And it's again why it's a shame that it didn't get the critical reception it should have gotten, because I do believe Sheryl Lee should have been nominated for Golden Globe at the very least, but Oscar,
I think
honest
she
to
got
God,
Razzie nominations, so there's that.
which is such
I
such
know.
Okay,
I hate
again,
Razzies. I'm still on
again,
record of saying the Razzies can go fuck themselves because I think that's
absolutely, it's ridiculous. But again,
language.
even if you don't like this movie, which is totally understandable, this is
I
not a
get that.
movie
Yeah,
for every.
Yeah,
But you cannot sit there and say this movie's shit because there's just too much skill and craft like involved.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Like,
I don't just say fuck the Razzies because of this. I say fuck the Razzies because I don't like shitting on stuff people like. Like, there people like
yeah,
movies, and just because I don't like them doesn't mean I have to go around saying that's the worst picture of the
right,
year. Like, that's
right.
just
yeah.
No,
yeah,
like what you like, especially at this day and age. Enjoy what you enjoy. Whatever makes you happy, enjoy
exactly.
it, man. Like
Yeah,
fucking enjoy it. Like don't
yeah,
let anybody steal your sunshine, man. And so for me, like
exactly.
it was, through meeting other Twin Peaks fans, especially when I got into college, and meeting other fans of David Lynch, that I started to find like people who loved Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me like I did. And that there was such a, I don't know, at that time in my life, there was such a feeling of vindication that I'm like, I'm not wrong on this, right? Because everybody else hates it. So when you find your people,
Yeah.
which again, I cannot thank you guys enough for letting me be a part of this journey, because when you find people who get it, like you form a bond, man. Like it's a legitimate bond. I think Twin Peaks fans are, are just we're like that, and David Lynch fans we're like that. You find someone who gets that on the same level that you do, or remotely close to the same level that you do. It's a wonderful feeling. And when this film came out, my friends and I who loved it, we loved it dearly, and we talked about it ad nauseum for months.
Here you are, 30 some years later.
32 years
32
later.
years later, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. 32
And here I am with two very good friends talking about David Lynch films again, and here we are back at Twin Peaks. So it all comes back around. It's happening again.
I do think this, like I said at the beginning, this is the film that taught me that I don't have to accept what everybody else says about a movie. Right? Yeah. Like that. I mean, I'd loved movies all through my childhood. I was a movie kid even before. And but I think there was a part of me that was like, oh, am I not supposed to like this? I think really cemented for me that I don't have to not like something because
exactly
being you don't have
being a Gen X kid like we are, you grew up in a heyday where it was like it was a wealth of riches in the cinema. Every year there were tremendous movies, right? But it's like it's okay to not, it's like it's perfectly acceptable to like the Star Wars trilogy and Indiana Jones and that whole trilogy. Back to the Future, like that's perfectly accepable, and those are some of my favorite films of all time. Yeah. But like when you talked about something like Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, it was kind of like, like there's like pump the brakes there, buddy. What the fuck is your problem? So it's like it was such a weird time, but luckily we were right there on that cusp where weirder cinema in the 90s started really kind of getting into its vibe.
Yep.
Weirder television. You know, one of the things we talked about behind the scenes at my play when we found out that we had multiple Twin Peaks fans, one of my friends burned us all copies of a fantastic miniseries from the early 90s called Wild Palms.
Oh, I remember Wild Palms.
Wild Palms was, again, on ABC. This trippy cyberpunk kind of thing that's really fucking nuts, but it's really cool.
Is it available anywhere?
It's
not.
I'll just say my buddy is an absolute pirate, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum, and so I got all kinds of burned things. I don't know where the fuck you got them from. I don't care because I got them. Nobody can take them. They're physical media, and I can watch them whenever the fuck I want. But Wild Palms, it was out on DVD, but that DVD is way out of print, and I don't think it's ever been done in high definition. But
yeah, it doesn't say. Doesn't say it's available anywhere.
We started getting into that cusp of weird, cool things in cinema. Like we were getting weirder, more. And if you think about it, in the 90s, we started getting into more independent cinema. And so like it didn't feel, you weren't as much, once that kind of wave hit, you weren't as much out of the loop being a Lynch fan. Like it didn't feel
right.
Like you were too
because the Tarantinos and the other, like there was a lot of the John Singletons. There's a lot of people making what would have been sort of like indie cinema before, but was coming mainstream and was becoming big. Yeah, for sure.
And so you had like a lot of cool films like that were just popping up, and it just, there was some validity to it.
Like it was really sort of coming into an age where what was considered indie and artsy before was becoming very mainstream.
Well, and if you think about it, everything kind of runs in a 20-year cycle. In the 90s, it felt like we were getting film that was coming out in the 70s again. You know, film that, you know, not everything had to be a fucking new IP that was going to have sequel upon sequel upon sequel. You got just weird, cool one-off shot films and some really cool shit at that. So, you know, it's funny how Lynch has always felt like he's been just a slightly ahead of the curve, honestly. Like he's always been kind of like that innovator without even knowing. I mean, like he kind of was an innovator for the midnight movies with Eraserhead. And I'm not saying there weren't films before that, like El Topo and everything that did that, but Eraserhead kind of brought the midnight movie to a prominence. Like there was something different about it after that film came out. And then it opened up the gates for so many other films to get discovered that had been kind of lost or, you know, just ignored or had never had the chance to get made until Eraserhead got made, right? So like the midnight movie genre is just started booming after Eraserhead becomes really big. Then you get, you know, his Academy Award nomination stuff with The Elephant Man, which is a legitimately great, you know, biopic, you know, and that is his own thing. Then you get Dune, which I understand why people don't like that film, but boy, in a lot of ways, that film is so ahead of the curve for what science fiction films would become down the road. Like it was almost, again, 20 years after 2000.
Well, also,
so it's like
you could say without Dune, would we get the David Lynch we have today? If Dune was a more financially successful film, even if it was like an okay success, we may not even have Twin Peaks.
We may not. Yeah. And so for me, like, you know, then you look at Blue Velvet, which was, again, ahead of the curve, you know, and then it spawns Twin Peaks, which was television that was way ahead of its time and is still finding influence on people who make television. So he's always been kind of ahead of the curve. It's like him and John Carpenter, like their films are always like ahead of the curve and people don't pick up on what they're doing until like 5, 10, 20 years later. And then suddenly they're like, oh, you know, that movie, The Thing, that's kind of a masterpiece. It wasn't the piece of shit we all said it was in 82. It's kind of maybe one of the greatest movies ever made. So it's like, there are certain directors who are always ahead of the curve, and Lynch just seems like he's always been one of them. Like I said in our review of Wild at Heart, that really does feel like the first true 90s film. Like it did not feel like something that came out of the 80s like a lot of films in the early 90s did. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt like a movie for a new generation, and it set the tone for a lot. And Twin Peaks,
I think that, too. And I think that, you know, like we were saying, like we sort of come full circle. We come to the end, and again, like I said, I think that there's this real. At the time, that was going to be it for Twin Peaks. Like we had already known this movie wasn't going to take off. It wasn't going to lead to a bunch of sequels. Most likely, this was going to be the end. And yet, it does create this Mobius strip, which of course leads him into the ideas of things for Lost Highway and other things. Because really, this paired with the original 2 seasons of the show do create kind of a Mobius strip of the film. Because you can start right fresh. You can
start right back.
Again, which I think is great, but now we don't have to because now we can move into the return. So
yep.
That's where we
So-
are at this point, which is crazy to think we finally got to it. You
Yeah.
know?
What was the magazine, the French magazine that called it an 18-hour movie and named it?
I don't remember. They gave it the best picture of the year
Yeah.
of 2017 because they just said it was just a
Yeah.
18-hour movie, and they're like, it's just the best movie of the year. Period. We're done.
Yeah.
This is
well,
it.
and
It's the best
I
movie.
also read that, and I don't know if I dreamed this. Again, appropriate in this case. Maybe I dreamed it. But that David Lynch actually said, you know what? You don't necessarily have to watch the parts in numerical order when you watch The Return. You could watch them in almost any order. And I think there's that might be true. We should talk about that maybe a little bit as we're watching
I
through
would
it.
say up to the final 2 episodes, yes.
Right.
Up to
Okay,
the final
maybe.
2. But I really love it in the order that it hit
I
because
do too.
there's just something about the revelations that you get them as you get them.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm super excited to talk about is I think perhaps the greatest hour of television ever made, and that's Twin Peaks: The Return, Episode 8.
Yeah, no kidding.
That is
I'm
the
really
game changer.
excited. There's so much
And
I'm excited to talk about. When it
I
comes
told
out.
everybody at that point, I was like, look, man, if you're not with this show now, stop. Because, man, this is like, if you were a fan, if you knew Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, you had so many holy shit moments watching that hour that you were like, yeah, man.
So I have watched it through twice. I don't know
Same
if
here.
either of you have watched it any more times than that, but I'm
watched it
really
through twice.
excited to see a third time through.
I'm about to start it a third time with my friends from the play. So this all times out really well. Because one of them, he owns The Return. He's never watched it. And I'm like, homie, we got to change that right now.
Wow. Yeah.
Timing is perfect.
Couple of things before we close it
Yes,
out.
there's still plenty to talk about with this movie. Jesus, there's time.
We could have kept talking for more hours.
We
but-
easily could. This movie-
Mark Frost wasn't heavily involved in this, was he?
No, he backed out.
Other than as executive. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Because it does feel more.
I think you feel like there's less of the Frost influence is the word I'm looking for than there is in The Return and the original series. But I mean, obviously we've talked about this in the series. He is as an essential part of Twin Peaks as Lynch is.
Absolutely.
His contributions are still here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you didn't get to read the books that he released when The Return came out, the history of Twin Peaks is fantastic. What a tremendous book. But I will say, if you want some resolution, the final dossier does give some finality to some of The Return, not all of it, but there is some finality to it that I thought was really nice that Mark Frost had a chance. Now, again, you don't have to take it as gospel. Right. You can just take it as an interpretation, or you could never read it and never care. And there are fans of Twin Peaks that are in both camps.
Yeah,
people who love it and people who hate it. I love the idea of like an alternate ending because again, when you get to the end of The Return, there's a lot of ways you can interpret it.
Yeah, so, we're gonna have so much to talk about.
We have so much to talk about. I'll just say this: I think the best way to describe The Return, it's a simple sentence, but I've said from the word go, this is how I describe it, and I think this is what was going on in Lynch's mind when he made it. And that's simply that you can never go home again.
Yeah.
And that's all I'll say as we lead into that discussion. But you can never go home again. If you keep that in the back of your mind while you watch it, it will make a lot of the decisions in the series make sense.
Yeah.
The pacing of it, the feel of it, it will all make a lot more sense if you keep that in mind. I think what he could have done had Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me been a hit. A modest hit. If he could have made sequels, I think a lot of stuff in The Return would have been in those sequels. I don't think it would have been The Return.
No.
Because
it would have been different. Because that's 25 years of ruminating.
Exactly. But I think it would have been very interesting to see what could have been with the films that he would have made. I think a second film would have been more what people were wanting, which is what the hell happened to Cooper? What's going on with him? Since we saw at the end of
The Return.
Yeah. So I think a lot of things in The Return would have been, not all of it, but I think a lot of it would have been there. There are definite things that would have been there that would have been what people were wanting from Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Not understanding that what they were given was something really great and really special. But of course, as you get age, you get perspective and you reevaluate things and things play different. And I think Fire Walk with Me, I'm glad to see that it's finally in that point of retrospective where people are now seeing what Lynch was talking about, are now understanding that he was kind of ahead of the curve. Like he really was doing something very thought-provoking, very emotional, very emotional. That if it, the weirdness of it, if you were not familiar with the world, if you just came into it never having watched the show, I can see where you'd be like, what the shit is this? This reads like stereo instructions. I don't know what, I don't know what's up, what's down. I don't know what the hell this is. Like, why is that guy talking backwards? Why is David Bowie here? Like, what the shit? I get it. And I still to this day understand why people don't like Fire Walk with Me. I do. I'm glad I'm not one of them. But I get why they don't. But I think what's really, when you look at what the film did in 1992, again, ahead of the curve. There's a lot of serious things it's talking about that were missed because David Lynch doesn't spoon feed you. He doesn't beat you over the head with the obvious. Although, like I said, once you understand how Lynch works, like there's a lot of things you look back in the film, like we talked about the opening of the movie with the hatchet going through the TV. Like, I don't know how much more you needed to have someone tell you this ain't the TV show. Like this ain't it, guys. Like it's not that at all. Even the music, it sounds like Twin Peaks, but it's not. You know what I mean? Like it's still a different tune. But I will say that soundtrack, one of the best soundtracks of the 90s. I think Badalamenti's work in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is outstanding. I love The Pine Floats, one of my favorite pieces of like jazz type composition of the 90s. I adore that track, and it was on repeat in my CD player many a time when I got the chance, or I'd keep rewinding it and playing it on my tape deck. There's just so many great pieces of music that aren't from the TV show, but still feel like they would wholly have fit in the TV show. Mm-hmm. But again, they give the film its own identity, that it's not the exact same thing. It's a different thing, but it's still what you know and love. It's just a different way of looking at it. So the soundtrack, while you still have your traditional cues, there's still some of them there. It's really a wonderful body of music that fits perfectly in the Twin Peaks universe, but really does stand alone and helps the film to stand alone as its own thing. And that soundtrack is a top-notch soundtrack. It's one of my favorites that Badalamenti's ever put out.
Absolutely. So it looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but it looks like the reprisal of this movie kind of started in the early 21st century, around the time. Now, I know Bravo ran the original series back like not too long after it canceled, but I think
that's where Lynch added on the intros with the Log Lady, which are fantastic, by the way. They really make every episode better.
Yeah,
that was the first time that happened.
Log Lady intros, I do really love watching the Log Lady intros. Yeah,
but I think they ran them again like around 2001, 2002, around not too long. Somewhere around the timeline that Mulholland Drive comes out, and it looks like when like he's like anointed as, okay, you're one of the great filmmakers.
Yeah,
this is where the reappraisal starts for
I
the
do
film.
think Mulholland Drive jump-started that reappraisal of this film specifically. Yes,
and that's pretty fitting, because Mulholland Drive is such a great film, and again, there are so many Twin Peaks type connections to that film that it's very fitting that that's the one that did it. But I also think
most Twin Peaks of his other films.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with that statement, Colin. But I will say that I definitely think when The Return came out, a lot of people again kind of continued with that reevaluation, and it was funny how many reviews I read where they were like, "Man, if you thought Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me like didn't make any sense, whatever, like you've got to have it under your belt before you go into this." Right. And I love the fact, again, Lynch made this film that for so long people misunderstood and hated. He made it a vital part of Twin Peaks lore. And I really appreciated that going into The Return, this movie that I'd loved for so long. There was so much payoff in The Return from that movie, and it just makes The Return such a richer experience. You don't have to necessarily have seen it to watch The Return, but boy, there's a lot of The Return that would just not ring right for you. That
I just think there's so much. If you don't watch the entirety of Twin Peaks, you're missing out. Like
you're missing, it is a full total story. If you miss one part of that story, you're missing out on a lot of that story. And I'm glad that when the day is done, and people would watch the whole thing from beginning to end, all the way to the end of The Return, I'm glad that Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me has a much more cemented legacy in the lore of Twin Peaks, and just in general in the filmography of David Lynch. I'm glad that this film has finally achieved what he was doing, back in 92. Like, I can't imagine how heartbroken he was at the reception to this film. because there's so much
Well, I
in
mean,
that film.
5 years between this and Lost Highway, so I guess he did take it pretty hard.
I figure, and it was also probably pretty hard for him to get backers to make whatever he wanted to make, because this film did tank.
Right.
So
Mhm.
it was much like Dune. It was an albatross around his neck, and it's a shame that it was, because it's a great film.
Shame,
but the difference between this and Dune is this is fully his vision. This is him wanting to make the film he wanted to make, and we may have brought this up. Yeah, and we may have brought this up when we did our Mulholland Drive episode, but I wonder where it went from people hating his work to by the time Mulholland Drive comes out, everyone's like, well, he's a genius, obviously.
Well, so I don't think it was a full-on, like, I think, first of all, I think Lost Highway had some good reception, but it certainly wasn't the hit that...
No. But
right.
There were people who were picking up what it was putting down.
But people didn't write off Blue Velvet, and...
No,
Blue Velvet was the huge critical reception.
People still thought he was a great filmmaker. They just thought he made some bad stuff at that point, right? And again, now we're reevaluating, looking back at both Dune and Fire Walk with Me and saying, okay, maybe they weren't bad. But but at the time, I think people weren't like, oh, David Lynch is a terrible filmmaker. It was always just, oh, he's made some clunkers, right?
I think a lot of his people, he's lost his step. He's lost his touch. He's not the golden goose anymore. And I think that was very unfair, because again, he comes back with Lost Highway, and I think it's the greatest film he's ever made. But it's I'm glad that the return exists, if not for anything, because it made people go back and look at all of Lynch's films. Like, it made them want to go back and say, well, man, if we were wrong about Fire Walk with Me, maybe we were wrong about this, maybe we were wrong about that. And I think in a lot of ways, the return is kind of like the crown finally being put on him to be like, this guy is a legitimately great American filmmaker. Like, he really is,
because it came after another film that is often considered not to be one of his greatest, Inland Empire, right? Like, that one gets a lot of bad reception too, and that one that maybe isn't one that's totally redeemed for me. I'm really curious about what I'm going to think when I rewatch it again, but yeah, so I think there is something to that. But I do think that the return also cements that Twin Peaks is his magnus opus.
Yes, there's no other way to put it. It is absolutely his crowning achievement. And when you look at the scope of Twin Peaks, like, it's such an impressive thing. Like, that this all came from really the minds of Lynch and Frost. Like, it's kind of amazing that these two guys created the gigantic world. And I mean, like, worlds, honestly, like, when you think about it, there's Twin Peaks and then there's all the other stuff. Like, it's a genuine achievement, in creativity, and a genuine achievement in filmmaking and storytelling, that they were able to bring back so many of the cast to go into the return, that they were able to bring back who they brought back for Fire Walk with Me. Like, it's a really impressive thing. And for me, like, in my top 10 filmmakers of all time, David Lynch is always going to have a seat. He is always going to be at that table. There is no way on earth that he's not. And that's across the span of all directors. Like, he will always be in my top 10, probably my top 5, if I'm honest. And he'll always have that space. He will live there rent-free. There will never be another director who will just, like, knock him out of the way. And a big part of that is because of Twin Peaks. It's honestly my single favorite TV show. The whole scope of the damn thing is just so incredibly epic, and so, like, it's almost like impossible that it exists. Like, how does this show exist? Like, it's amazing when you think about this crazy fucking universe existing, but it does, and we're all better for it.
Well, and I think that we could probably, for the most part, I mean, maybe we would break out one episode, like 8, or the last 2 episodes set to talk about separately. But I think generally you could talk about this series in 2-episode chunks.
Oh, I think that's the way we would want to do it. But episode 8 definitely has got to be.
Yeah, we might have.
That's going to be its own
interesting. Interesting. You talked about chunks. So, like I said, Blank Check, a podcast that does filmographies, and they're doing David Lynch right now. So they're breaking up the return. They're doing episode 1 through 7, and then they're doing episode 8 as its own episode.
Yeah.
And then they're doing 9 through 13, and then 14 through the rest. That's how they broke it up.
See, I think that's a lot to fit into one conversation. I
1
think
through 7
it is.
Two at a time.
Yeah, that's too many. That's what I would think, 2 at the most.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I'd feel
I
about
say
that one
let's watch
too.
1 and 2 and start there, and then we'll see as we
Yep,
move through. But I think because remember, 1 and 2 aired together
they
as
did.
the
It was a
preview.
2-hour
Yeah,
premiere,
on the same day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
and then the last two premiered, the 17 and 18 premiered together as well.
Well,
So yeah,
3 and
I'm
4 apparently were paired together
And I
too.
think if you had the app, the Showtime app or something, you could actually watch all 4 together at first.
yeah.
There was, if you had a subscription, sorry, to, but otherwise they were just 2 and then 2 the next week. So if you could watch all 4, but then you had to wait like 2 whole weeks before 5.
Yeah.
But still, it was. Yeah, I say let's break them. I say let's do 2 at a time for now, and we'll see how that goes, and we'll see.
You got me on that one. I'm totally fine with that. I think there's enough going on in these episodes that I
I
think
can't talk about 6 episodes in one shot. That's
God no.
No, that would be a
Want
6-hour
to. That's awesome.
conversation.
yeah.
Bless those people for doing it. I couldn't.
Yeah.
There's way too many thoughts I've got going on.
I'm sure they're condensing it because they did a whole episode on season 1, you know.
Oh man, no. I mean, like I know
Yeah.
it's only 8 episodes, but God, there's a lot in those 8 episodes. Oh,
Yeah.
to do that. No.
All right. And so are we looking to try to do this in a couple of weeks? That would put us into December 1st.
Yeah, what are we thinking? The 8th, because since the 1st is the Sunday after Thanksgiving here in America.
That's fair. Yeah.
We could do the 8th. I think that's good for me too.
Yeah, the 8th should be fine on my end.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. We will head to the return. It's been a lovely conversation. I enjoy both of your insights from the whirlwinds this movie has had.
Oh man,
It's
it sure has had that.
It's an incredibly well-made film, and I can't wait to see, like, just watching it, how much more richer the return will be for me second go around.
Dude, it will play so different for you, man.
I'm so excited to rewatch The Return.
Yeah, it's going to play very different for you.
I do want to say something to anybody that's watching this or watching it later. I'm not trying to get political. I don't think this is a political statement, but I think with recent events in history right now or world events, if you are somebody out there, whether you're male, female, or child, and you are either suffering from some form of abuse, whether it be verbal, abuse, physical, or sexual, or you know somebody that is, go tell someone. Find someone that will help you. There's somebody out there that will believe you and do what they do to get you out of that situation.
Yeah. By all means, if you're dealing with something like that, I promise you there is someone who will listen, someone who will believe you. That don't keep it to yourself. Don't feel like you're the only one. I can tell you for guys, like I said, I've had my own Me Too moment, and it wasn't as extreme as others I've encountered. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm like, I've been through everything, but the most important thing to be able to do is to talk to someone. And if anything, if it's nothing more than talking to like a therapist of some sort, do it. Therapy is one of the most important things that will help you through something like that. I've gone through it for the death of my son. I've gone through it for multiple things that have happened in my life. And I am on the other end of it because I did. Had I not done those things, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. So I'm a firm believer that I don't care if you're the manliest man that ever manned, you can still go talk to a therapist. You still have the right to talk to a therapist because that will help you be the better version of yourself, the person that you want to be for your family, for your friends, for your coworkers, for whoever is important in your life. That kind of work that you do there helps make you a better person for all of them. Bottling these things up, keeping it inside, it has never worked in the long, sad history of abuse in this world. It has never worked, and it never will. Take the time for yourself. Take the time for, even if you do it for your family, do it for your kids, do it for your spouse. If you have to do it for someone else other than you, do it for them. Because in the end, I promise you, the work that you put in and talking to someone, it matters. You will come out on the other side of it, man. It's not going to be easy. And I would not dare ever try to tell you that it will be. But the work will pay off. And when you get through it, and you will get through it, you will be on, and you'll be in a much better place. And you'll be in a better place for the people in your life that matter to you. Having gone through this, I'm speaking from experience. It matters, and the longer you wait, the disservice you do to yourself just grows day by day. Talk to someone, because there is no reason to keep that built up into yourself. You've done nothing wrong, and you are deserving of someone to listen to you and believe you and help you through it.
That is a great place to wrap this up. And on a
Yep.
much lighter note, I'll wish everyone a happy Life Day to all the Star Wars
Yes.
nerds out there. That's today.
It is officially Life Day. Got to go watch some Jefferson Starship, right? And Harvey Korman.
Thank you, Colin, for lightening up. I'm sorry to end it on that note, but I feel like the
that's
subject matter of this movie is an important message
Yes.
to put out there for people.
It's critical, and especially right now where we're at. But
Yeah.
as always, thank you both for allowing me to be a part of this. It is such a joy to talk about one of my favorite filmmakers with people who appreciate him on the same level that I do. I've been excited all day knowing that we were going to talk about Fire Walk with Me today, even though it is a difficult film. There is such a joy of getting to go back to the world of Twin Peaks that always makes it worth doing. So, from the bottom of my heart, guys, thank you all so much. The friendships that I have with you guys from doing this is something I'll be gratefully thankful for next week in 2 weeks in Thanksgiving. I'm very thankful for those friendships, and I hope we can figure out somewhere to meet, triangulate someplace where we can meet up. And if so, first round's on me.
All right, guys. Thank you so much again. Also, echo all of that. I was so excited for today, and I'm very excited for a few weeks from now starting to talk about The Return.
Heck yeah, man. Heck yeah.
Yes. Yo, Kevin, have a great Thanksgiving. Colin, have a great couple of weeks ahead. Thank you. And if you haven't seen The Missing Pieces and you watch Fire Walk with Me and you need some more lighthearted moments, they're in there in The Missing Pieces. That will be a little break in between all the roughness of the film.
And I promise that
so check it out.
Scene, it'll live rent free in your head too.
Check it out. Thank you guys. You all have a good night and a wonderful week.
Much love from West Virginia to you guys, man. Take care.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.